Welcome to Sleepy Tales, where relaxing stories are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. For more peaceful tales, subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. Now, get comfortable and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. Some stories are not really about becoming something new, but about surviving long enough to discover who you already are. The Ugly Duckling is one of those stories. It is about being out of place in a world that seems quick to judge, about loneliness that settles in quietly, and about the slow passage of time that changes things when nothing else seems to help. This is not a fast or easy journey. It moves through small moments, hard seasons, and silent endurance. If you stay with it, the story reveals something gentle and powerful. That growth often happens when no one is watching, and that belonging sometimes waits patiently at the very end of the road. The countryside lay wide and open beneath a soft summer sky. Green fields stretched in every direction, broken by fences, small streams, and a quiet farmyard where animals lived close together. Near the edge of the yard, hidden among tall grass and broad leaves, a mother duck sat patiently on her nest. She had been there for many days, warming her eggs and waiting for life to begin. The sun rose and fell, the wind passed gently over the land, and still she waited, calm and hopeful. At last, the eggs began to crack. One by one, small ducklings pushed their way into the world. They were yellow, round, and lively, quick to stretch their legs and blink at the light. The mother duck watched them with care as they gathered around her, already eager to follow wherever she moved. The nest, once full of smooth eggs, now held tiny, breathing creatures, and the quiet grass was filled with soft movement. But one egg remained. It was larger than the others and had taken longer to hatch. The mother duck waited again, unsure but steady, until at last the shell broke open. From it came a duckling unlike the rest. He was bigger, grey instead of yellow, and his body looked awkward and heavy. His movements were slower, and his feathers did not shine like those of his siblings. From the moment he appeared, he seemed out of place among them. The mother duck looked at him closely. She turned him gently with her beak, as if checking that he was truly hers. He was alive and strong, yet different in a way that could not be ignored. Still, she gathered him in with the others and led them toward the farmyard, where life waited beyond the grass. At first, the ducklings explored the world together. They followed their mother across the yard, through shallow water and warm dirt. The other animals noticed them quickly. Hens, ducks, and even larger birds looked on as the new ducklings passed by. The small yellow ones drew smiles and gentle attention, but the large grey duckling caused confusion. Heads turned. Some animals stared longer than they needed to, others moved away. Before long, the differences became something more than quiet looks. The ugly duckling, as he soon came to be seen, was pushed aside during meals and bumped out of the way. When trouble happened in the yard, when food spilled or feathers were ruffled, he was blamed even if he had done nothing wrong. His size and strange appearance made him easy to notice and easy to judge. The other ducklings did not understand him. They moved quickly and played together, while he struggled to keep up. When they rested, they did not make room for him. When they swam, they left him behind. He tried to walk like them, to hold his head the same way, to move without drawing attention. No matter how hard he tried, he always seemed wrong. As days passed, the farmyard grew louder and harsher. Animals spoke of him without kindness. Some pecked at him openly, while others whispered and watched. Even people who came through the yard noticed him and shook their heads at his strange shape. Everywhere he turned, he felt unwanted. The world around him seemed sharp and crowded, full of eyes that saw only what was different. The mother duck did what she could. She stayed close to him when she could, and tried to protect him from the worst of the cruelty. Yet even she grew tired of the attention he brought. Her other ducklings were safe and admired, while he brought trouble wherever he went. Though she did not turn him away, her care became quieter, and he felt the distance growing between them. The ugly duckling felt this change deeply. He did not understand why he caused such anger. He did not know why he could not belong. He only knew that every day felt heavier than the last. The farmyard, once full of sound and movement, began to feel like a place of constant danger. He walked carefully, always expecting another push or sharp peck. He often wandered alone to the edges of the yard, where the grass grew taller and the sounds were softer. There, he could breathe without being watched. He looked out toward the fields and the distant trees, places he had never been. Something inside him stirred when he looked at the open land, though he did not yet know what it meant. As time passed, the cruelty did not fade. Instead, it became part of daily life. The ugly duckling learned to lower his head and move quickly, hoping to avoid notice. Still, notice found him. The farmyard was not large enough to hide in, and there was no corner where he could feel truly safe. One day, the pressure became too much. Surrounded by noise and rejection, the ugly duckling felt a deep pull to leave. It was not a clear plan or a brave choice. It was a quiet understanding that staying would only bring more pain. The farmyard held no promise for him, only endless struggle. Without looking back, he slipped away. He moved past the fences and into the wild grass beyond, his steps uncertain but determined. The sounds of the farm faded behind him, replaced by wind and distant calls of unfamiliar birds. The world ahead was wide and unknown, but it could not be harsher than what he had left behind. As he walked into the open countryside, the ugly duckling did not know where he was going. He only knew that he had to keep moving. Somewhere beyond the fields and streams, he hoped there might be a place where he could exist without fear. With the farmyard far behind him and the sky stretching endlessly above, his journey into the wider world had begun, carrying him forward into a future he could not yet imagine. The ugly duckling moved forward into the open world, leaving the farmyard far behind. The land around him felt larger and quieter, filled with tall grass, small ponds, and paths shaped only by wind and wandering animals. At first, he walked without direction, guided only by the need to keep going. Each step carried him farther from the place where he had been rejected, yet the feeling of being unwanted followed closely behind. He soon reached a wide marsh where wild birds lived among reeds and shallow water. They were not like the farm animals he had known. They were cautious and alert, watching him carefully as he approached. The ugly duckling hoped they might accept him, or at least allow him to stay near them. Instead, they reacted with the same confusion and distance he had come to expect. His size and colour set him apart once again. Though they did not attack him, they made it clear that he did not belong among them. He stayed near the marsh for a short time, feeding when he could and resting in hidden places. The nights were cold and strange sounds filled the darkness. Still, the open sky above him felt less heavy than the crowded farmyard. Even loneliness felt different here. It was quieter, more spread out, and less sharp. One morning, loud noises broke the calm. Hunters entered the marsh with dogs, and fear swept through the birds. Wings beat the air, and animals fled in every direction. The ugly duckling froze, unsure of where to go. The dogs ran past him, barking and splashing through the water, but they did not stop. Hidden by reeds and mud, he remained unnoticed. When the sounds finally faded, the marsh felt empty and broken. Shaken and exhausted, the ugly duckling left the marsh and wandered on. He crossed fields and streams, resting wherever he could find shelter. Days passed, and the warmth of summer slowly faded. The air grew cooler, and the light softened. Leaves changed colour and fell from trees, covering the ground in quiet layers. As autumn deepened, food became harder to find. The ugly duckling grew thinner and more tired, but he kept moving. At times, he saw flocks of large white birds flying high overhead. Their wings moved smoothly, and their shapes were graceful against the sky. Something stirred inside him when he watched them. He did not know why, but the sight filled him with both longing and sadness. He felt drawn to them, yet certain he could never be like them. Cold winds soon followed, and the first signs of winter appeared. Ponds froze at their edges, and the ground hardened beneath his feet. The ugly duckling struggled to survive as the days grew shorter. He found small patches of open water where he could swim, but each night became more dangerous. His feathers offered little protection against the cold, and his body ached with hunger and fatigue. One night, the cold became overwhelming. A pond he rested near froze completely, trapping him in place. Unable to move freely, he beat his wings against the ice until he grew weak. Just as his strength failed, a passing farmer noticed him and carried him away. Warmth returned briefly as the ugly duckling was taken into a house, placed near fire and light. But the warmth did not bring peace. The strange indoor world frightened him. Loud noises and sudden movements filled the space. People and animals crowded around him, curious and unaware of his fear. In panic, he flapped and stumbled, knocking into objects as he tried to escape. Soon, he found his way back outside, bruised and shaken, but free. Winter closed in fully after that. Snow covered the land, and silence spread everywhere. The ugly duckling hid among bushes and hollow spaces, conserving what little energy he had. Many days passed without food. His body weakened, and his thoughts grew slow. At times, it seemed easier to stop moving and let the cold take over. Yet something inside him refused to fade. Even in his weakest moments he held on. Each morning he woke still alive, and each night he found another place to rest. The winter was long and unforgiving, but slowly almost unnoticed, it began to loosen its grip. When spring finally arrived, the change felt gentle and quiet. Ice melted, and water flowed freely again. Green shoots pushed through the soil, and the air softened. The ugly duckling, now larger and stronger than before, felt a new energy move through him. His feathers had changed during the long months of hardship, though he did not yet realize how much. Drawn by instinct, he followed a familiar pull toward open water. He reached a clear lake surrounded by trees and fresh grass. There, he saw the same white birds he had watched from a distance before. They moved calmly across the water, their reflections smooth and bright. Fear rose within him, shaped by every past rejection. Still, something stronger guided him forward. Expecting anger or attack, the ugly duckling swam toward them. He lowered his head, ready to accept whatever might happen. Instead of being driven away, the swans glided near him peacefully. Their presence felt calm and steady, unlike anything he had known before. As he moved through the water, he caught sight of his reflection. The image staring back at him was no longer awkward or grey. His body was strong and elegant, his feathers white and clean. He had grown into the shape he had always been meant to have. The truth settled over him quietly. He was not an ugly duckling at all. He was a swan. The years of loneliness, pain, and survival suddenly made sense. He had not been wrong or broken. He had simply been growing, changing slowly while the world judged him too soon. Standing among the swans, he felt no need to hide or prove himself. For the first time, he belonged without effort. The lake shimmered under the warm sky as he lifted his head and moved freely among his own kind. The past did not disappear, but it no longer held power over him. What once felt like shame became part of his journey, shaping the strength he now carried. The ugly duckling was gone, not because he had changed into something new, but because he had finally become what he had always been. Some stories are small and quiet, yet they carry entire worlds inside them. Thumbelina is one of those stories. It follows a tiny girl through rivers, fields, dark tunnels, and open skies, not with loud adventures, but with gentle moments of fear, kindness, and hope. Though she's no bigger than a thumb, her journey is vast, filled with strange creatures, long winters, and the constant search for a place where she truly belongs. This is not a rushed tale, but a slow unfolding of courage in its softest form, where even the smallest life can carry a great destiny. Once there was a woman who lived alone in a small quiet house. She was not rich, and she was not important, but she had a gentle heart. More than anything else in the world, she wished for a child. Each day she looked at the empty rooms of her home and imagined soft footsteps, laughter, and a small voice calling her name. But year after year passed, and no child came. One day, the woman went to see a wise old woman who knew many secrets of the world. The lonely woman spoke of her wish, and the wise woman listened carefully. At last, she gave the woman a tiny seed and told her to plant it in a flower pot at home and care for it well. The seed looked ordinary, but the woman felt hope the moment she held it. She planted the seed in soft earth, watered it gently, and placed it near the window where sunlight could reach it. Before long, a green shoot appeared, and soon it grew into a beautiful flower that looked like a closed tulip. The petals were smooth and fresh, and the flower stood proudly on its stem. One morning, the woman noticed that the flower had opened. Inside, sitting on the soft centre of the blossom, was the smallest girl she had ever seen. She was no taller than a thumb, perfectly shaped, and more beautiful than any doll. The woman was filled with joy. She named the tiny girl Thumbelina because of her size. Thumbelina lived happily with the woman. She slept at night in a walnut shell, covered with rose petals, and during the day she sat on a plate that served as her table. Her food was flower dust, and her drink was dew gathered from petals. Her voice was light and sweet, and she sang softly to herself. The woman loved her dearly and took great care to keep her safe. For a time, their life was peaceful. Thumbelina knew only warmth, gentle hands, and quiet days filled with flowers and sunlight. But the world beyond the window was larger and darker than either of them knew. One night, while Thumbelina slept, a large toad hopped through the open window. The toad was ugly and cold-hearted. When she saw Thumbelina, she thought the tiny girl would make a fine wife for her own son. Without asking or caring, the toad grabbed Thumbelina and carried her away into the night. When morning came, Thumbelina awoke to find herself far from home. She was placed on a wide green lily leaf that floated in the middle of a river. Tall plants rose from the water like walls, and the current moved slowly beneath her. The toad's plan was to keep Thumbelina there until her son came to claim her. Thumbelina was frightened and cried, thinking she would never see her home again. The fish swimming below the leaf noticed her tears falling into the water. They felt sorry for the tiny girl who had done nothing wrong. Quietly, they swam together and bit through the thick stem holding the leaf in place. Once the stem was cut, the leaf began to drift freely down the river. Thumbelina floated away, carried by the gentle current. A butterfly soon appeared and circled above her. She tied a thin thread around herself and fastened it to the butterfly, which helped pull the leaf forward. As she travelled, birds flew overhead and sang, and people on the riverbank stopped to stare at the strange sight of a tiny girl sailing past on a leaf. Thumbelina felt scared, but she also felt wonder as she saw how wide the world truly was. The river carried her far from where she began. Eventually the leaf drifted to the shore, and Thumbelina stepped onto dry land. She wandered through tall grasses and thick forests, sleeping under leaves and flowers. She ate what little food she could find, but it was often not enough. Though summer was still warm, she felt alone in the vast world. As time passed, the days grew shorter and colder. Flowers began to fade, and insects prepared for winter. Thumbelina grew weaker, her tiny body struggling against hunger and chill. One day, she came across a field mouse who lived in a warm tunnel underground. The mouse noticed how small and tired Thumbelina was, and felt pity for her. The field mouse brought Thumbelina into her home and gave her food and shelter. For the first time in a long while, Thumbelina felt safe from the cold. She helped the mouse with small chores and listened as the mouse spoke of comfort, warmth, and the dangers of the outside world. The mouse believed that safety mattered more than beauty or freedom. Soon, a visitor began to come often to the mouse's home. This visitor was the mole. He lived deep beneath the earth and owned many tunnels and rooms filled with riches. He disliked sunlight, flowers, and fresh air, preferring darkness and quiet. The field mouse spoke highly of him and believed he would be a good match for Thumbelina. Thumbelina felt fear when she heard this. She loved the sun, the sky, and the open world, even with all its dangers. The thought of living underground forever, far from light and flowers, made her heart heavy. But she was small and dependent, and she did not know how to speak against the plans being made for her. As winter fully arrived, snow covered the ground above, and the earth became hard and cold. Thumbelina followed the field mouse through long tunnels beneath the ground. Though she was warm, she felt her world growing smaller and darker with each passing day. During one walk through a passage that led close to the surface, Thumbelina saw something lying still in the cold earth. It was a swallow, stretched out and unmoving, its wings frozen by the winter air. Others passed by without stopping, but Thumbelina felt deep sadness for the bird. She gently covered it with leaves and moss, trying to give it warmth and comfort, even though she believed it was already dead. As she sat there quietly, caring for the swallow in the darkness beneath the frozen world, Thumbelina did not know that this small act of kindness would soon change the path of her life, even as her future seemed more closed in than ever before. Thumbelina's days underground passed slowly. Though the field mouse kept her warm and fed, Thumbelina felt her heart grow heavy. She missed the sun that once touched her face, and the sky that stretched wide above her. The tunnels felt narrow, and the air felt still. Each day seemed the same as the last, and the promise of marriage to the mole hung over her like a shadow. She tried to be grateful for safety, yet deep inside she felt herself fading, like a flower kept too long in the dark. She often thought about the world above, now hidden beneath snow and ice. She wondered if spring would ever return for her. Though she was small, her longing was great, and it filled her thoughts even when she tried to be brave. In a quiet corner of the tunnel system, Thumbelina returned often to the place where the swallow lay. Though others believed the bird to be lifeless, she could not forget him. She gently brushed dirt from his feathers and wrapped him with dry leaves to keep him warm. Each time she visited, she felt hope stir within her, even when the swallow did not move. Little by little, warmth returned to the bird's body. One day, Thumbelina noticed a faint movement beneath the feathers. The swallow was alive. From that moment on, she cared for him with even greater devotion. She brought him water, cleaned his wings, and kept him hidden from those who would not understand her kindness. Though winter still held the earth tightly, life was slowly returning. As time passed, the swallow grew stronger. His breathing became steady, and his wings regained their strength. He looked at Thumbelina with gentle eyes, aware that her care had saved him. Though she said nothing, her heart felt full, knowing she had done something good in a dark place. When winter finally began to loosen its grip, the ground above softened. The swallow felt the pull of the open sky once more. He stretched his wings and felt the air change. He knew it was time to leave the underground world and return to the warmth he loved. Before he went, he made it clear that Thumbelina did not have to remain where she was. Thumbelina felt fear and hope at the same time. Leaving meant stepping into the unknown, but staying meant giving up the light forever. She chose the sky. With care, she climbed onto the swallow's back, holding tightly as he rose upward through a hidden opening in the earth. They burst into the open air just as spring was beginning. Sunlight touched Thumbelina's face, and fresh wind filled her lungs. Below them, the earth was waking. Snow melted into streams, trees formed new buds, and flowers pushed their way toward the light. Thumbelina felt joy rise within her, greater than anything she had ever known. The swallow carried her far away, over mountains and rivers, to a land where the air was warm and gentle. Flowers bloomed everywhere in bright colours, and the sky was clear and wide. The swallow flew to a beautiful place, filled with blossoms, and set Thumbelina down softly among them. There she noticed something wonderful. Tiny people, no taller than herself, moved among the flowers. They lived lightly, as if the land itself welcomed them. They had wings like insects and faces full of kindness. Thumbelina watched them with awe, realizing she had finally found others like herself. The people welcomed her without fear or doubt. They gave her a home within a flower and showed her the beauty of their world. Among them was a gentle king, small and bright, who admired Thumbelina's kindness and courage. In time, Thumbelina was given delicate wings of her own, allowing her to move freely through the air, no longer bound by the ground. Thumbelina felt at peace. All her long travels, her fear and her patience had led her to this place. She no longer felt lost or alone. She belonged beneath the open sky, among flowers and light, where her small size was not a weakness but a gift. The swallow returned to visit her, and she remembered with gratitude the dark days when kindness was her only light. She understood now that even the smallest heart could shape its own destiny through care and courage, and so Thumbelina's journey came to an end, not in silence or shadow, but in warmth, freedom, and joy. What once began in loneliness grew into a life filled with purpose, proving that even the smallest seed, when given care and hope, can grow into something truly beautiful. Some stories begin with magic, others with kings and castles. But this one begins with a man who has nothing except his courage and his luck. What follows is a tale of hidden places beneath the earth, strange creatures that obey ancient rules, and a single object so small it can change a life forever. This is a story about power found by accident, choices made without knowing their cost, and how fortune can turn in an instant, for better or for worse, when the smallest spark is struck. The soldier came home from war with nothing but his uniform, his strong stride, and a calm belief that life would still find a way to work out. He had marched far and long, and now the road stretched ahead of him in quiet curves through fields and trees. His pockets were empty, and the reward he had once imagined for his service never came. Still he walked with his head held high, as if poverty were only a temporary condition and not something meant to define him. The sound of his boots on the road kept him company as the day slowly moved forward. As he walked, he met an old witch standing by the side of the road. She looked worn by time, with a crooked back and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. The witch spoke of money as if it were nothing, promising him more than he could imagine if he would do her a small favour. She told him of a hollow tree nearby, old and wide, with an opening that led deep into the ground. All he had to do was climb down inside and bring back a tinderbox that rested at the very bottom. The task sounded simple, and the promise of gold was enough to quiet any doubts that tried to rise in his mind. The soldier followed her to the tree. It stood apart from the others, its trunk thick and split open like a mouth that had been waiting for centuries. The witch gave him clear instructions, telling him what he would find below and how to stay safe. She lowered him into the darkness using a rope, and the light from above slowly shrank until it was nothing more than a pale circle far overhead. The air grew cool and still as he descended, and the walls of the hollow tree felt smooth and ancient, as if countless years had passed without disturbance. At the bottom, the soldier stepped onto solid ground and found himself in a wide chamber lit by an unseen glow. In the centre sat a large chest overflowing with copper coins. Beside it rested a dog of enormous size, its eyes as large as plates, staring without blinking. The soldier remembered the witch's instructions and placed the dog carefully on top of the chest. The creature did not resist or move, and soon the soldier filled his pockets and bag with copper until they could hold no more. A passage led him onward into a second chamber, even larger than the first. There another chest waited, this one filled with silver. Guarding it was another dog, its eyes even larger than the first, shining like full moons in the dim light. Again, the soldier followed the instructions exactly, moving the dog aside and helping himself to the silver. The weight of the treasure began to press against him, but excitement kept his steps steady. The third chamber was the largest of all. Its ceiling rose high above him, and the glow there seemed brighter and warmer. In the centre stood a chest filled with gold, more than the soldier had ever seen in his life. Sitting on top of it was the third dog, enormous and still, with eyes as wide as wagon wheels. The soldier felt a moment of fear, but it passed quickly. He moved the dog just as before, and took as much gold as he could carry, knowing that this alone could change his life forever. Only one thing remained. At the far end of the chamber sat the tinderbox, old and simple in appearance, resting as if it had been forgotten. The soldier picked it up and examined it closely. It looked ordinary, yet the witch had wanted it more than the treasure itself. This made him uneasy. When he was pulled back up to the surface, the light of day felt strange after the long darkness below. Once above ground, the witch reached eagerly for the tinderbox. The soldier refused to hand it over, wanting to know why it mattered so much to her. Her refusal to explain made his distrust grow stronger. In that moment, he acted without hesitation. The witch fell, and the forest returned to silence as if nothing had happened at all. The soldier stood alone with his treasure and the tinderbox, uncertain but free. He continued on to the nearest city, where the weight of gold quickly opened doors that had once been closed to him. He bought fine clothes, good food, and a comfortable place to stay. People who would have ignored him before now welcomed him warmly. He lived well and without worry, spending freely and enjoying every comfort he had once lacked. Days passed into weeks, and weeks into months, and the soldier rarely thought about the road that had led him there. But gold, no matter how much there is, does not last forever when spent without care. Slowly his riches faded. One by one, the comforts disappeared, and the people who had praised him before began to turn away. At last, the soldier found himself in a small, poor room at the edge of the city, with only a few coins left to his name. The contrast was sharp and painful, and for the first time doubt crept into his thoughts. It was then that he remembered the tinderbox. He had carried it with him the whole time, though he had never used it. Sitting alone in the dim room, with night pressing against the windows, he took it out and looked at it again. It seemed unchanged, quiet and plain, offering no sign of what it might hold. Needing light, and with nothing left to lose, he struck the tinderbox. The spark flared and the air shifted, though the soldier did not yet understand what he had set into motion. The tinderbox had barely sparked when the first dog appeared, massive and silent, its eyes glowing like lanterns in the darkness of the soldier's small room. It stood motionless for a moment, assessing him, and then, as if understanding his command without a word, it moved aside. One by one, the other two dogs emerged from the shadows, each larger than the last, their eyes immense and unwavering. The soldier watched in disbelief. The dogs were obedient, attentive to his slightest gesture, and their presence filled the room with a strange, commanding energy. He realized, with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that the tinderbox held a power far greater than any gold or silver chest he had ever carried. At first, he experimented cautiously. A tap of the box and the dogs obeyed, moving at his will, their massive forms almost too large for the small space. He struck it again, summoning them to his side, and they obeyed without hesitation. Gradually, he began to understand the breadth of control the tinderbox gave him. Where once he had relied on coin and charm to secure his place in the world, he now wielded obedience itself. The city streets, the markets, the grand houses, all felt trivial compared to the secret force now at his command. Despite the temptation to use the dogs for wealth, the soldier's mind returned again and again to the princess. Stories of her beauty and isolation had reached him through servants, merchants, and whispers on the wind. She lived in a palace walled off from the world, attended yet unseen, admired yet distant. The soldier, emboldened by the power of the tinderbox, grew increasingly curious. Night after night, he summoned the dogs. The largest carried him swiftly and silently past guards and walls. The others followed in shadows, their glowing eyes invisible in the darkness. Soon, the princess herself was brought to him. She did not resist, nor did she speak. She was silent and delicate, her presence a stark contrast to the raw strength of the dogs surrounding them. These visits became routine, though the soldier did not yet see them as dangerous. He marvelled at the strange magic he controlled, and each night brought a new thrill, a sense of power he had never known. Yet the palace was watched, and curiosity there soon turned to suspicion. Courtiers whispered of disappearances, of shadows moving where none should, and the king, troubled by reports of odd occurrences, sent men to investigate. The soldier, aware of their growing vigilance, began to sense that his freedom, once effortless, was now precarious. The tinderbox was his secret, his advantage, but even such a weapon could not guarantee invisibility forever. Eventually his luck ran out. He was discovered, and the soldiers moved swiftly. The dogs, though immense, could not prevent the inevitability of arrest, for the power of the tinderbox could only be exercised in response to his command. Bound and led through the streets, the soldier felt a strange mix of fear and resignation. The palace gates closed behind him, and the city's whispers were replaced by the cold, hard walls of a prison. Each step toward judgment felt heavier than the last, and he was made to wait as rumours swirled outside the courtroom. He realised, with growing dread, that his fate was in the hands of those who neither understood nor feared the magic he possessed. The trial was brief, the verdict predetermined. The soldier was sentenced to death, and the announcement spread like a shadow over the city. Within his cell, he could feel time dragging, the hours stretching long into the night. The tinderbox lay in his hands, inert until he struck it, and he wondered whether its power could save him, or if he had misunderstood its limits. The darkness of the cell was deep, almost comforting in its certainty, until a thought occurred to him. The tinderbox had never failed him before. Perhaps, in the face of the impossible, it could work its magic one final time. When the hour of execution arrived, the soldier was led to the scaffold. The crowd had gathered, expectant and grim, their voices a distant hum against the pounding of his heart. He held the tinderbox tightly, striking it once more. The dogs appeared instantly, their enormous forms materializing as if from thin air. The largest stepped forward, the second beside it, and the third completed the circle. The effect was immediate and absolute. Shock rippled through the assembly. Men stumbled, guards faltered, and even the king paused, unsure how to react to forces beyond understanding. The dog's eyes, immense and unwavering, surveyed the scene, and the soldier, though still constrained by human form, felt the tide of power shift in his favour. With a thought, the soldier commanded the dogs to act. They moved with precision, overwhelming the authority of the guards without violence, their presence alone enough to assert control. Doors were thrown open, chains fell away, and the crowd scattered in awe and fear. The palace and the city were no longer realms of human order, but places where obedience answered only to him. The soldier, steady and deliberate, used the moment to reclaim what was his, and the whispered fear that had once pursued him now fled before the eyes of creatures so vast and extraordinary. In the aftermath, the soldier found himself in possession of both freedom and authority. The princess, returned to her palace after the events, was now under his quiet watch, the danger of the old order replaced by the unassailable power of the tinderbox. The city, once a place of limitation and rules, had become malleable under his command. He moved with purpose, careful yet confident, understanding at last that fortune was not only about gold or gifts, but about knowing the right moment and wielding it with clarity. Time passed, though the soldier scarcely noticed it. He no longer relied on the small comforts of coins or the fleeting praise of the crowd. The dogs remained near, ever present, a constant reminder of the power he possessed. He learned restraint, discovering that the tinderbox's magic was most potent when tempered by patience and awareness. Each decision he made was deliberate, each strike of the box considered. The city adjusted to his presence, the palace to his authority, and in the quiet moments the soldier reflected on the journey that had begun with poverty and chance. The witch, long gone, became little more than a memory, a starting point for what had unfolded. The soldier now moved in a world where the unusual and the ordinary coexisted, where obedience and discretion could bend reality itself. He understood that power could be fleeting or permanent depending on one's choices, and that the greatest treasures were not always silver or gold, but knowledge, timing, and courage. The Tinderbox, small and unassuming in appearance, had reshaped his entire life, proving that even the humblest object could contain unimaginable potential when discovered and used wisely. In the end, the soldier's fortune was transformed. The city no longer threatened him, the princess's presence no longer required stealth, and the forces that had once sought to control or harm him had been undone. He moved through his life with a calm certainty, the tinderbox always close at hand, a symbol of both his past struggles and the power now firmly in his grasp. He had learned that fate could be guided by wit, courage, and the careful use of extraordinary tools. The world, once vast and unknowable, now lay open to him, shaped not by chance alone, but by the steady hand of one who had struck a spark and mastered it. Winter had settled over the city like a thick grey blanket, and the streets were cold and silent under the heavy snow. In the glow of lanterns and shop windows, people hurried past, wrapped in warmth and purpose, leaving behind only the faint echoes of their footsteps. Among them, a tiny figure wandered, unnoticed, clutching a bundle of matches close to her chest. Her little feet were bare beneath the thin rags she wore, and her eyes, wide and searching, reflected both fear and hope. In the midst of the bustling city, where life seemed full and bright, she carried a quiet sorrow, a story of cold, hunger, and fleeting light that would appear only when the matches she held flared to life. The city was alive with light, but only in certain places. On New Year's Eve, snow had fallen lightly during the night, covering the streets with a thin, cold blanket that reflected the glow of lanterns and shop windows. The little match girl walked slowly along the pavement, her bare feet making no sound against the snow, and yet she was painfully aware of each step. The cold bit into her toes, climbing her legs and wrapping around her small body. Her thin shawl and ragged dress offered little protection, and her hands, red and stiff, were pressed tightly around a bundle of matches she carried close to her chest. She shivered as she moved past groups of people hurrying home or into the bright shops that lined the street. Laughter floated out into the evening air, mingling with the scent of roasted meats, fresh bread, and warm pies. In one window, a family gathered around a table, their faces bright with joy, their hands full of steaming food. The little match girl paused for a moment to look, pressing her face against the frosted glass. She could feel the warmth behind it, could imagine the softness of the chairs, and the gentle heat of the fire. Her stomach twisted, not only with hunger, but with longing, and she turned away quickly, afraid someone would see her staring. The city seemed enormous, vast, and full of life, yet it was a place where she could disappear without anyone noticing. She thought of her family, or rather the absence of one. There was no one waiting for her at home, no warm bed to run to, no loving hands to lift her up when she stumbled. Her mother had gone, her father was gone, and the world seemed unkind, its people busy with their own pleasures and problems. She wondered sometimes if she mattered at all, a small shadow slipping between lamp-posts and shop windows, trying not to be noticed, trying not to freeze. The little match girl held up her matches, her voice tiny and uncertain, calling softly to the passing people. "Matches, matches for sale," she said, but the crowd was too busy to hear her. A merchant closed his shop with a slam, his face flushed with excitement and the warmth of the fire inside. Children ran past, their coats thick and their shoes high, throwing snow into the air and squealing with delight. No one looked at her. No one stopped to buy even a single match. Her lips trembled from the cold, and her voice was barely more than a whisper, swallowed by the sounds of the bustling city. Her feet hurt with every step. She paused, trying to shake out the numbness, but the snow had crept into her shoes, if they could be called shoes at all. Her little toes were stiff, blue, and painfully cold. She wrapped her shawl tighter, shivering as a gust of wind cut down the street. The light seemed brighter, the warmth further away, and the snow seemed endless, stretching into the night. She felt small and invisible, like a shadow that had no place in the bright, cheerful world around her. She walked on, stopping at each window, holding up her matches and calling again. Her voice was like a fragile thread, fragile as the matchsticks she carried. No one stopped, no one saw her. She pressed her hands together, trying to warm them, and then she did something she had never dared before. She struck one match. The flame sprang to life, trembling in her hands, small but fierce, and the cold seemed to retreat for a moment. Its light was golden, soft, and warm, and she held her hands close to it, feeling a comfort she had not known for hours. In that brief illumination, she saw a vision. There was a warm stove before her, large and glowing, with flames dancing inside and throwing a gentle light over the room. A kettle of tea sat upon it, steaming, and a loaf of bread rested nearby, golden brown and soft. She imagined herself sitting close to the fire, her feet tucked under her, her hands wrapped around a warm cup, her body slowly thawing. The warmth was so vivid, so real in her mind, that she almost forgot where she was. But the match flared and then went out, and the vision vanished, leaving her alone in the dark once more. She struck another match, her small fingers shaking from cold and hope. This time she saw a roasted goose, golden and fragrant, lying on a table surrounded by sweet fruits and pies. She could smell it, could almost taste it, and for a moment her stomach eased, her mind filled with the comfort of a meal she had never known. The light of the match reflected in her eyes, giving life to a small glow in her pale cheeks. Each new flame brought another vision, more enchanting than the last. A soft blanket tucked around her, a warm room filled with laughter, a gentle hand brushing her hair and whispering that she was loved. The city around her faded into the shadows as she clutched the matches. She did not notice the icy snow sticking to her hair, or the wind tugging at her thin clothes. In the warmth of the flames, she was no longer cold, no longer hungry, no longer alone. Each match was a small miracle, a tiny spark that carried her away from the hard stones of the street into a world where she was safe and cherished. She struck another, and for a moment the glow revealed a vision of a Christmas tree, tall and bright, its candles flickering with colours that danced across her mind. Beneath it were gifts wrapped neatly, and she imagined herself sitting there, laughing quietly, her hands free to touch soft paper and smooth ribbons. But with each vision came the reminder that it was only temporary. The flame died quickly, leaving her hands numb and her cheeks stinging from the cold. Still, she dared to strike again, desperate for warmth, for comfort, for even a moment of peace. She lit one more match, holding it close to her face, and in the trembling light she saw not only food and fire, but faces that smiled at her with love. She saw herself wrapped in softness, cared for and warm. She imagined a presence beside her, a figure who would never leave, who would protect her from the snow and the hunger and the cruel indifference of the streets. Her tiny body shivered, exhausted, but she did not put the match out. It burned bright, filling her mind with visions that seemed almost real. Her feet ached, her hands were stiff, her lips cracked from the cold, but the flame made her forget the world for a few precious moments. She imagined curling up beneath the warmth, letting the light surround her until the chill was nothing more than a memory. Outside, people hurried past, still wrapped in their coats, still oblivious to the small figure struggling to survive on the edges of their world. The little match girl struck another match, trembling with anticipation, holding it tightly as if it could shield her from the cold entirely. The flame flared, casting a soft glow that made the snow sparkle and the buildings shimmer. She did not notice how late it had grown, how silent the streets had become, or how the cold pressed harder against her small body. All that existed was the light in her hands and the visions it carried. In that moment, the world seemed full of possibility, of comfort, of warmth. She dared to hope, even if only for a little while, that the next match might bring something more. A presence she had lost, a love she had never known, or a warmth that would not vanish when the flame died. With trembling fingers, she prepared to strike the next match. The cold pressed closer, biting at her skin, but her heart held a fragile courage. She lit it, and the flame danced, promising something new and astonishing. She could not know what awaited, only that each little light was a doorway, a brief escape, a tender promise that the world could be brighter, softer, kinder, even if only for a fleeting moment. She held the match close, shivering but filled with hope, and the snow continued to fall quietly around her, blanketing the streets in white and silent waiting, as though the world itself paused for what was about to come. The little match girl's fingers were stiff and trembling as she struck another match. The tiny flame flared into life, its light warm and golden against the icy darkness of the street. For a moment, the city, with its snow and cold and rushing people, disappeared. She saw a Christmas tree, tall and bright, its branches heavy with ornaments that sparkled like tiny stars. Candles flickered along the green boughs, casting dancing shadows across the floor of a cosy room. Beneath the tree were gifts, wrapped in colourful paper, tied with ribbons that begged to be touched. She imagined herself sitting beside it, reaching for a present, and feeling the soft paper in her small hands. And for a heartbeat, she felt joy, pure and untainted by hunger or cold. The match guttered and dimmed, but the vision lingered in her mind like a sweet memory. She struck another, the flame catching almost desperately, and now she saw a room filled with warm light, a roaring fire in the hearth, and a table laden with food. The smell of roasting meat, sweet pudding, and fresh bread filled her imagination, and she imagined a hand reaching out to place a plate before her. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire, a sense of being wanted, of being safe, of being seen. Yet when the match burned out, she was back in the streets, the wind cruel against her face, the snow soaking through her rags, and her tiny body trembling from the cold. Still she struck again. The match flared high, brighter than the others, and a new vision unfolded. She saw her grandmother, the only person who had ever shown her love, standing with open arms. Her face was gentle, her eyes filled with care, and her presence brought a comfort that was stronger than any fire or feast. The little girl reached out, yearning to step into the warmth of the vision, but her feet remained frozen on the hard, snow-covered stones. The cold bit deeper, and her strength waned, but she could not stop lighting match after match, drawn by the possibility of love, warmth, and belonging. Each vision carried her further from the harsh reality around her. She saw rooms filled with laughter and kindness, where children played and adults spoke softly, where no one went hungry and no one shivered in the night. She imagined beds piled high with blankets, gentle hands brushing her hair, faces that smiled without judgment or indifference. Her heart ached with longing, her mind full of sweetness that the cold streets could never offer. At the same time, the snow fell heavier. Her body grew weaker, and the chill reached bones she had not even known existed. Yet still she struck matches. Each tiny flame became a doorway, a small miracle, a promise that perhaps in some other world she could be warm, fed, and loved. Her eyes sparkled in the light of each tiny fire, reflecting visions that seemed more real than the world around her. The cold was sharp, the wind relentless, and her fingers grew too stiff to hold the match properly, yet she did not stop. One by one, the flames revealed a world without hunger, without fear, without loneliness. The little girl's emotions swirled with the visions. Joy that warmed her heart, longing that made her ache, sadness at the absence of these comforts in her real life, and a deep yearning for safety that made her press her hands to her chest as if she could trap the warmth there. She knew she could not stay in the vision, could not live there. Yet the brief moments offered more than mere comfort. They were reminders that such things existed, and perhaps one day, somewhere, there could be a place for her too. Her body grew fragile. The cold had reached through her rags and into her very bones. She felt the ache in her feet, the stiffness in her fingers, the shiver that refused to leave. Her breathing became shallow, and every inhalation felt like a jagged shard of ice sliding into her chest. And yet, the visions endured. The fire of the matches was fleeting, but the warmth they carried, the sense of love and care, lingered. She imagined her grandmother smiling at her, bending down to take her small hands, wrapping her in a blanket so soft it felt like clouds. She imagined the cold melting away, her body filling with warmth that did not fade with the extinguishing of a match. Another match! She held it closer to her face, her eyes reflecting the small flame. In it, she saw a world of abundance. Rooms filled with food, laughter ringing through halls, warmth and safety surrounding every living creature. Her heart swelled with the beauty of it, and for a fleeting moment she forgot that she was standing in the snow, naked to the cold, weary beyond measure. She imagined herself walking freely through that world, no longer alone, no longer small, no longer frightened. The snow continued to fall, heavier now, covering her hair, her shoulders, her thin dress. Her body was growing weaker, almost numb, yet her spirit clung to the light. She struck another match. The flame flared, stronger than before, and in it appeared her grandmother again, closer this time. She could see the lines of her face, the softness in her eyes, and she felt a warmth that seeped into her soul. She reached out instinctively, longing to be held, longing to disappear into the comfort and safety that the vision offered. The snow fell around her, the wind howled, but in that light she was sheltered, cradled, loved. She struck match after match until her bundle was almost gone, each flame revealing the same vision, growing ever more vivid, more real. The little girl felt herself lifting away from the streets, from the cold, from the pain of hunger. The last match remained in her trembling fingers. She struck it, and it flared brilliantly, larger and brighter than any before. In its light, her grandmother was there, arms open wide, face smiling with tender love, beckoning her. She stepped forward in her mind, finally leaving behind the harsh, frozen world. The warmth of the vision filled every inch of her being. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the city carried on in its indifference. Inside the flame, the little girl was safe. She did not feel the cold anymore, didn't ache with hunger, did not know fear. The streets, the rushing people, the icy stones, they were gone. Only the light remained. Only the love. Only the sense of belonging that she had longed for all her life. The match burned down to her fingers, then went out, leaving no smoke, no trace, only a faint glow in the memory of the city. The little match girl lay silent, still in the snow, her small body at peace. Around her, the snow continued to fall, gentle and white, covering her and the streets in quiet and stillness. In the warmth of the final vision, she had left the world of cold and hunger behind, merging with the love and light she had found in the flames. The city continued, unaware of the small figure that had once wandered its streets. But the visions she had seen, the comfort she had felt, were real in a way that could not be taken away. Though her life had ended in the harsh world outside, she had entered a place where warmth, love, and safety were endless. The snow shimmered around her, as though touched by the glow of the matches, as though the brief brilliance of her small lights had left a trace on the world. And in that quiet, cold city, beneath the falling snow, the little match girl's journey found its tender, sorrowful conclusion, leaving behind only a memory of fleeting warmth, enduring love, and the fragile beauty of hope. Once upon a time, in a kingdom where every castle seemed to touch the clouds, there lived a prince who had seen almost everything the world could offer. Yet, despite his riches, his adventures, and the marvels of distant lands, He could not find someone who felt truly right for him. One stormy night, when the rain hammered the windows and the wind whispered secrets through the trees, a mysterious visitor arrived at the castle, soaked to the bone and carrying nothing but a small bundle. What happened next would test not only the patience of the castle staff, but also reveal the true heart of a princess in a way no one could have imagined. This is the story of how a single tiny object, hidden beneath a mountain of beds, could change the fate of a kingdom. In a kingdom that stretched across rolling hills, sparkling rivers, and green forests, there lived a prince whose life, by all appearances, was perfect. His castle stood on a hill, tall and proud, with towers that reached toward the clouds and walls made of stone so white they seemed to glow in the sun. The halls inside were lined with tapestries. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceilings, and every room smelled faintly of fresh flowers and polished wood. From the outside, anyone might have thought that the prince lived in a world of endless joy. Yet inside, he felt a quiet emptiness that no treasure, no banquet, and no grand celebration could fill. The prince had seen many princesses visit his castle, from faraway lands where the seas were as blue as sapphires and the mountains touched the sky, to neighbouring kingdoms where the meadows were filled with wildflowers. Each princess brought gifts and smiles, jewels and fine dresses, and polite conversation about horses, music, and art. They laughed at the right moments and curtsied in the correct way. But the prince, despite his polite nods and courteous manners, could never feel that spark he longed for. They were all elegant and clever, but none felt truly genuine. Each visit left him more certain that wealth and titles alone could not reveal a real heart. He walked often through the castle, alone, tracing the patterns in the marble floors, peering out of the tall windows at the world below, and listening to the soft echoes of the distant fountains in the courtyards. He wondered if a real princess even existed, someone who would not be dazzled by his castle or his fine clothes, someone who could notice the quiet things, the way the wind made the trees bow gently, the smell of rain on the stone walls, or the way the sun glanced across a polished chandelier. These were the things that mattered to him, and he feared he might never meet a princess who cared for such simple wonders. One night, as the wind began to rise and clouds gathered thick and heavy over the kingdom, the prince sat by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. The rain began to fall, first in light drops that tapped against the windows, then in torrents that hammered the roof and ran in small rivers along the castle walls. Thunder rolled across the hills, and lightning split the sky with sudden, brilliant flashes. The storm seemed to reach every corner of the castle, yet inside the prince felt only the quiet longing that had followed him for years. It was then, in the middle of the night, that a knock came at the massive castle door. It was a sharp, urgent sound, a contrast to the soft rhythm of the rain. The servants, roused from sleep by the storm, hurried to see who could be standing outside at such a terrible hour. They opened the door and found a young woman, soaked through and shivering, her clothes clinging to her like wet leaves. Mud streaked her dress, and her hair hung in damp strands across her face. Her eyes were wide and bright, filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and exhaustion. She claimed, with her voice trembling from cold and fatigue, that she was a princess seeking shelter from the storm. The servants exchanged doubtful glances. She looked nothing like the perfect images of princesses they had been trained to expect. Her shoes were ruined, her dress torn and muddy, and she carried no jewels or fine possessions to mark her as nobility. They whispered among themselves, uncertain whether they should allow her inside. Yet there was something in her voice, something quiet and sincere, that made it impossible to send her away into the night. The matter was taken to the king, who, though cautious, wanted to be fair. He remembered a story he had once heard in his youth, a curious method for discovering whether someone was a true princess. According to the tale, only a genuine princess would have the sensitivity to feel a small pea hidden beneath a great number of mattresses and feather beds. It seemed an unusual test, almost foolish, yet the king could think of no better way to uncover the truth. Perhaps, he reasoned, this night would finally bring the prince the princess he longed for, if only she could pass this peculiar trial. The queen, who was always delighted by small acts of cleverness and mischief, agreed to help. She oversaw the preparations herself. In a large, warm chamber, 20 mattresses were stacked high, each one soft and inviting, and upon them 20 feather beds were placed, each plump and luxurious. Hidden beneath the very bottom mattress, like a secret waiting to be discovered, lay a single pea. The servants carried the tired young woman to the bed, and she climbed carefully, foot by foot, to the top, her soaked dress dripping onto the polished floor. She was weary from the storm, her body aching from travel, and yet she showed no complaint. She thanked the servants politely, offering a faint smile despite her exhaustion. Once atop the immense pile, she lay down, arranging herself as comfortably as she could, and slowly the storm outside and the warmth of the chamber lulled her towards sleep. The prince, who had been informed of her arrival, watched quietly from a distance, anxious yet hopeful. He wondered whether this princess, whom he had never seen before, could be the one he had waited for so long. Could a heart as delicate as his own exist in someone else? He had dreamed of such a meeting, yet now, seeing her exhausted and fragile, he realized that the true test was not just about patience or wealth, but about sensitivity, perception, and perhaps a kind of honesty that could not be faked. As the night stretched on, the princess shifted slightly, turning from side to side as she sought comfort among the mountains of bedding. The storm continued its relentless drumming against the castle walls, yet within the chamber a quiet tension hung in the air. Every breath she took, every movement, hinted at the discomfort that might betray her sensitivity. The servants and the king waited in silent anticipation, curious to see if she would truly feel the tiny object hidden below, the pea that had been carefully placed to reveal her identity. Exhaustion finally overtook her, and the princess sank into a deep, dream-filled sleep. Though her body seemed at rest, her night had been marked by an unusual awareness, a subtle discomfort that no ordinary princess could feel. The king and queen exchanged knowing looks, their hearts filled with anticipation for the morning. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the castle, a quiet magic had settled, a promise that this night would be remembered for years to come. The prince, too, felt a stir of hope he had not known in many lonely nights, sensing that perhaps the search for a real princess was nearing its end. And so the castle slept, the storm raged, and the princess lay atop her mountain of mattresses and feather beds, unaware that a single tiny pea had the power to reveal her true nature. What she felt, how she endured the night, and what it would reveal about her heart were yet to be discovered. The morning would bring answers, and with it, the possibility of a change in the life of the prince and the kingdom he longed to share with someone genuine. But until then, the night remained, full of quiet suspense, the weight of anticipation settling over every corner of the grand castle. The princess's night was far from peaceful. Despite the layers of mattresses and the softness of the feather beds, she could not find comfort. Every movement brought a faint but persistent discomfort, a small point of pressure that pressed into her back. She turned from side to side, adjusting herself as best she could, but the sensation remained, subtle yet impossible to ignore. Her eyes opened more than once during the night, reflecting the dim glow of the candlelight from the hall, and she took slow, careful breaths, wondering why a bed so high, so cushioned, could feel so strange. Her sensitivity, it seemed, was extraordinary. Even the smallest disturbance, invisible to anyone else, could make her restless. The princess had grown up with careful attention to her surroundings, with experiences that taught her to notice the quiet and the subtle. She was aware of the gentle sway of the trees in the wind, the faintest sound of a creek hidden behind rocks, and the whisper of her own heartbeat in moments of silence. And so, the single pea hidden beneath 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds was enough to keep her tossing and turning, despite the luxurious comfort above it. As the hours passed, the storm outside slowly faded. The rain lessened to a soft drizzle, and the clouds began to break, allowing the first pale light of morning to creep into the castle chamber. Still, the princess did not sleep deeply. She felt every lump and bump, each small imperfection pressing against her skin, and her body ached not from the cold or from travel, but from the peculiar discomfort that marked her as truly delicate. She wondered if anyone would understand, if anyone would believe that such a tiny object, so easily overlooked, could make such a difference to someone's night. At last, as the sun rose higher and painted the walls with a warm glow, she could endure no more. She rose from the bed carefully, her limbs stiff and her hair damp with the remaining traces of the storm. Her face showed her fatigue, though her eyes still held their gentle brightness. The servants, who had been waiting with quiet anticipation, assisted her down the towering stack of bedding. They had watched her the entire night, marvelling at her patience and endurance, and they could not help but whisper to one another that she was unlike any princess they had seen before. The princess, though exhausted, spoke simply and honestly about her night. She told the king and queen that she had hardly slept because something small beneath the mattresses had disturbed her continually. She described the sensation as a lump that pressed into her, making her turn and shift all night despite the softness of the beds above it. She said this not with complaint, but with the quiet dignity of someone who observed the truth of her own experience and shared it without embellishment. Her honesty struck the king and queen with astonishment. It was not the words themselves, but the clear proof of her sensitivity, her acute awareness, and her capacity to feel deeply. The king and queen exchanged smiles, their doubts replaced by certainty. This was indeed a real princess, someone whose nature could not be faked by appearances, charm, or titles. Her sensitivity, her refinement, and her sincerity were qualities that marked her as genuine, not merely noble in name, but noble in spirit. They marvelled that a single pea, hidden beneath such a mountain of comfort, could reveal so much about a person, and they felt a quiet joy in knowing that the prince's long search for a true princess was finally over. Preparations were made for the prince to meet her properly. The servants polished the floors, hung fresh tapestries, and lit the grand chandeliers so that the morning light would mingle with their glow. The princess was given new clothes, clean and simple, suited to her character rather than to extravagant display. She did not flaunt her nobility, but moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood herself. The castle was filled with a hum of excitement. Even the wind seemed to carry a lighter sound, as though the storm of the previous night had cleared the way for something new and hopeful. When the prince entered the chamber to meet her, he felt an immediate sense of recognition, not from her dress or her posture, but from the quiet strength and honesty in her eyes. He had dreamed of a princess for so long, but he had not known that he sought someone whose spirit matched his own, someone capable of feeling deeply, noticing the subtle, and valuing truth above all. In her presence, he felt a rare and profound relief. The longing that had followed him for years, the emptiness that no wealth or grandeur could fill, began to lift. The princess, despite her fatigue, greeted the prince with politeness and simplicity. There was no pretense, no calculated charm, only sincerity. She spoke of the night with quiet humility, and the prince listened with admiration, understanding in that moment that the smallest, most unnoticed details often revealed the most about a person's character. He realized that this sensitivity, so often overlooked in others, was the very quality he had longed for. Her perception, her honesty, and her delicate awareness were treasures far greater than jewels or fine gowns. The royal family and the castle staff watched as the prince and the princess spent the morning together. He showed her the rooms, the gardens, and the hallways he loved, and she observed everything with careful attention, commenting on the flowers, the sunlight on the walls, and the quiet sounds that only someone truly aware could notice. Her observations, small but insightful, filled the prince with joy. He had imagined meeting a princess, but what he had found was someone extraordinary in ways he had not anticipated, someone whose presence brought warmth and a sense of home he had never known before. As the day progressed, plans were made for the prince and princess to spend more time together. The castle buzzed with anticipation, not merely for the union of two noble titles, but for the joining of two genuine hearts. Courtiers, servants, and advisers all felt the subtle magic in the air, though none could say exactly what it was. They only knew that this was not the ordinary arrival of a princess seeking shelter. This was the beginning of something rare, a meeting that had the power to shape the prince's life and the kingdom itself. The princess, though weary, settled into the rhythm of the castle life with grace. She did not seek attention or accolades, but moved quietly through the halls, her sensitivity and awareness touching everyone she encountered. She laughed softly at small joys, noticed details others missed, and approached each task with patience and honesty. The prince, observing her, felt a profound contentment. At last he understood that a true princess was not measured by outward appearances, but by the depth of her heart, the acuity of her senses, and the honesty of her words. In that castle, with the storm long past and the morning sun warming the stones, the prince felt hope bloom where loneliness had once settled. He knew that the night's test had revealed more than a single pea. It had revealed a character of rare delicacy, someone capable of seeing and feeling the subtle truths that most overlooked. The princess had endured discomfort with grace, honesty and patience, and in doing so she had shown the very qualities that would make her not only a suitable companion, but a partner in the quiet joys and responsibilities of life in the kingdom. The prince realized that he had found not just a princess in title, but a true match in spirit. He could imagine a life of shared moments, where the small details mattered, where honesty was cherished, and where sensitivity was a gift rather than a burden. And though the story of that night had ended, the promise it held for the future was only beginning. The princess and the prince, in the warmth of the castle after a long, revealing night, had discovered the rare treasure of one another's hearts. The kingdom, with all its grandeur, now felt more alive, filled with the expectation of joy, companionship, and a connection that had been long awaited. In the quiet of the castle, as the morning sun danced across the walls and the servants went about their duties, the prince and the princess stood together, each aware that the other had endured a small trial that revealed great truth. They had learned that true nobility was found not in crowns or silk, but in the ability to feel deeply, to notice, and to remain honest even in discomfort. And so, the story of the princess and the pea ended not with grandeur or ceremony, but with the quiet certainty that the prince had found someone extraordinary, and that their life together would be built on sensitivity, honesty, and the small unseen qualities that define true worth. In a faraway kingdom, where the emperor's palace gleamed like gold, and every corner of the garden shimmered with flowers, there lived a tiny bird with a voice so pure that even the hardest heart could be touched. Known only as the Nightingale, it sang not for wealth or fame, but for the sheer beauty of sound itself. Its songs travelled across the palace walls, reaching the ears of those who least expected it, and leaving whispers of wonder behind. But as the emperor would soon learn, the power of a true song cannot be bought, and the smallest creature can teach the grandest lessons. In a kingdom far away, there was an emperor who loved beauty more than anything else in the world. His palace was vast, shining with gold, crystal and marble, and every room seemed to be designed to show off the riches of the world. The halls were filled with paintings, tapestries, and statues, each more magnificent than the last. Outside, the gardens were even more splendid, stretching as far as the eye could see. Flowers bloomed in endless colours. Fountains sparkled in the sunlight, and trees from distant lands grew side by side in careful harmony. Birds of every kind, from the smallest sparrow to the rarest parrot, filled the gardens with movement and song. The emperor loved it all. He loved seeing the finest things that money could buy, the rarest creatures, and the most beautiful art. But even in the midst of such splendour, the emperor's heart could still be touched by the smallest, simplest wonders, if they were truly remarkable. Among the countless birds in the garden, there was one that no one noticed at first. It was small and plain, with feathers of soft brown and grey that seemed almost ordinary. There were no bright colours, no jewelled patterns, nothing that shone like the birds in the emperor's collection. Yet this little bird had a voice that no one could forget. Its song was clear and pure, a melody that rose and fell like waves on a calm sea. Whoever heard it could not help but pause and listen, drawn in by the beauty of each note. This was the nightingale. It sang not to show off or to gain favour, but because the song was part of it, as natural as breathing. The forest and the garden were filled with many sounds, yet when the nightingale sang, everything else seemed to fade. Flowers seemed to lean toward it, and even the wind itself seemed to slow, as if holding its breath to hear more. The emperor first heard of the nightingale from a visiting official who had wandered into the palace gardens. He spoke of a small bird with a voice so beautiful that even grown men wept when they listened. Curious, the emperor ordered that the bird be found. It was not difficult, though the nightingale moved freely among the trees, singing whenever it pleased. One morning the emperor walked through the garden alone, past the fountains and the flowers, when suddenly the air filled with music. He paused, unsure at first where the sound came from, and then he saw it. A small, unremarkable bird perched on a branch. Its song was alive with joy and sorrow at the same time, as if the nightingale sang of the whole world in a single melody. The emperor felt something in his chest that he had never felt before. All the treasures in his palace, all the gold and jewels he had collected, seemed dull compared to the wonder of this small bird's song. He stayed there for hours, listening, not noticing the sun climbing higher in the sky. The melody touched his heart in ways he could not explain. In the song, he heard the forest, the wind, the rain, the quiet nights, and the laughter of people who had never existed in his palace. It was a song of life itself. The nightingale did not sing for praise or reward. It sang freely, moving from branch to branch, drinking in the air, and resting when it pleased. Its song was part of the forest as much as the flowers and the streams. Yet the emperor could not bear to leave it there, to let such beauty remain beyond his reach. He invited the bird to the palace, promising it comfort, protection, and safety. The nightingale did not understand words, but it seemed to sense the emperor's sincerity. It accepted, moving into a quiet chamber where the sun fell gently on a windowsill, and where it could look out over the garden it knew so well. In return, the nightingale filled the palace with its song. Its music made the grand halls feel warmer, the fountains sparkle brighter, and the gardens seem closer. The courtiers were enchanted. They paused in the middle of their busy days to listen, forgetting their own ambitions and duties, if only for a moment. Even the emperor's heart, so accustomed to riches and power, found joy in something that could not be bought. But the world outside the palace always has its own plans, and soon a new marvel appeared. A gift from foreign visitors arrived, carefully wrapped and polished. When opened, it revealed a bird made entirely of gold, its wings and feathers encrusted with jewels. This mechanical bird could sing too, a song composed to perfection, repeated endlessly without pause. Its music was delightful at first, a dazzling show of art and craftsmanship. The courtiers were amazed, and soon the emperor found himself drawn to the golden bird. He admired the intricate details of its feathers, the sparkling stones that caught the sunlight, and a precise, unchanging melody that played whenever the bird was wound up. The nightingale watched quietly. Its song did not falter, but it noticed that fewer people lingered at the garden to hear it. The emperor spent long hours near the mechanical bird, winding it carefully and listening to its perfection. The real bird, with its living song full of life, could not compete with the glittering beauty of gold and jewels. Yet it sang still, not out of pride or rivalry, but because that was what it knew. The melody that had once been the greatest treasure of the palace now seemed almost unnoticed. Still, there were moments when the emperor paused. Sometimes, when the mechanical bird's melody repeated the same notes for the 100th time, he would hear the memory of the nightingale's song in his mind. It came back to him with a richness that no gold could match, a warmth and depth that the mechanical bird could never hold. And though he admired the jewelled bird, he could not forget the nightingale, which had brought him something that riches could never buy. A connection to beauty itself, to the natural world, and to feelings that he had almost forgotten in his pursuit of splendour. The palace continued to echo with both songs. The nightingale sang in its quiet corner. The golden bird sat proudly in the drawing room, and the emperor's attention shifted uncertainly between the two. He was fascinated by the mechanical marvel, yet his heart longed for the living, breathing bird whose song spoke of life, freedom, and truth. The courtiers whispered about which bird they preferred, but no one could capture the nightingale's charm, no matter how hard they tried. By the evening, when the gardens were painted in the orange and purple of the setting sun, the nightingale would perch near the emperor's window, singing the softest, sweetest notes. The mechanical bird rested in its cage, still and cold, its melody winding down for the night. The emperor sometimes listened from afar, sometimes from nearby, but he was becoming more aware of the delicate balance between wonder and distraction, between real life and imitation. The nightingale noticed the change in his attention. It did not complain, it did not stop singing, but there was a quiet understanding in its small eyes, as if it knew that the emperor's heart would soon be tested. The bird's song was patient and faithful, carrying hope and warmth, ready to remind the emperor that the truest gifts are those that cannot be forced, bought, or controlled. The story of the emperor and the nightingale was only beginning. The beauty of the real bird had entered the palace, bringing joy and wonder, but the glittering allure of the mechanical bird hinted at challenges to come. For now, the nightingale sang, and the emperor listened, caught between the marvels of human invention and the simple, pure magic of life itself. The palace was still full of splendour, yet it was the song of a small, ordinary bird that had begun to change the heart of a man used to seeing the world in gold. And in the quiet of the garden, under the shadows of trees and the glow of the setting sun, the nightingale's melody promised more than entertainment. It promised a lesson in what truly matters. After many weeks of listening to the mechanical bird, the emperor's fascination grew into obsession. He admired the golden feathers, the jewelled wings, and the flawless repeated song. At first, it had seemed like a marvel, a dazzling work of art that could entertain at any hour. But soon, the perfection of the mechanical bird began to replace the warmth and unpredictability of the nightingale's living song. The emperor spent hours winding it carefully, listening to it again and again, until the palace echoed with its fixed artificial music. The courtiers complimented the emperor on his cleverness, marvelling at the invention, yet no one mentioned that the magic of the real bird was slipping further from their lives. The nightingale sang still, quietly and faithfully in its chamber overlooking the gardens, but it noticed the emperor's absence. The man who once paused in the sunlight to hear its song no longer sought it out. The nightingale's voice, full of life and feeling, could not compete with gold and jewels, nor with the mechanical bird's constant, tireless song. It was not that the emperor had forgotten the beauty of the real bird, but that he had begun to believe that beauty could be owned, polished, and perfected, just like a jewel. In the shadows of the palace, the nightingale realized that it could not force the emperor to listen, nor could it live for admiration alone. One morning, it rose from its perch, stretched its wings, and flew back to the forest where it had once sung freely. The bird left no note of complaint. It simply left, returning to the life it had always known, where it belonged. The emperor's fascination with the mechanical bird continued without interruption. At first, he was proud of his new treasure, showing it to visitors and winding it whenever he wished to hear its melody. But soon he began to feel a hollow emptiness that no jewelled bird could fill. Its song, though flawless, was predictable. It offered no surprises, no depth, no echo of the living world beyond the palace walls. The emperor could see its beauty, but he could not hear its soul. He grew restless, uneasy, and eventually ill. His body weakened as his heart and spirit suffered from neglecting what truly mattered. The rooms that had once seemed vibrant and full of life now felt cold and silent, despite the mechanical bird's endless song. As the emperor lay in his grand chamber, feverish and weak, he thought of the nightingale. He remembered the way its song had flowed like water, soft and strong, filling the air with joy, sorrow, and hope. Now, in its absence, he understood that no human-made object, however beautiful, could replace the living connection between heart and nature. He longed for the bird's voice, for the simple wonder that had once brought him peace. He called for it, but the nightingale did not appear. Days passed, and the emperor's illness worsened. One night, when the palace was still, and the golden bird had wound down into silence, a shadow came to his bedside. It was death itself, taking the shape of a quiet, dark presence that chilled the air. The emperor, for the first time, felt fear that could not be masked by riches or power. He saw the truth he had ignored, that life was fleeting, that no wealth could extend his days, and that the things he had prized most, gold, jewels, and splendour, could not heal or save him. The mechanical bird sat silent, incapable of offering comfort. Its song could not reach beyond the surface, could not speak to the needs of a human heart, and could not turn away the shadow that now loomed. Then, faintly at first, the emperor heard a sound that stirred something deep within him. It was not the golden bird, nor any instrument or jewel. It was a song alive with feeling, rising through the palace halls, carrying the voice of life itself. The nightingale had returned, drawn by the emperor's true need. It did not come for reward or praise, but because it could sense that its song was required, not to entertain, but to heal. The melody flowed into the chamber, soft at first, like a gentle wind through the trees, and then stronger, like a river growing from a trickle to a stream. It filled the emperor's ears, his heart, his very soul. Fever left his body. Fear and weakness faded. The warmth of living music returned to his chest, and the shadow of death receded. The emperor listened in wonder, understanding that the nightingale's song carried more than notes. It carried life, compassion, and the truth that beauty cannot be owned or replicated. Each note seemed to whisper lessons he had never learned, reminding him of the importance of humility, gratitude, and love for what is living and real. The palace, which had once been full of artificial splendour, now felt alive with the song. The walls seemed to breathe. The fountains sparkled with new light, and even the trees in the garden swayed as if bowing in appreciation. The mechanical bird, once the emperor's pride, sat untouched, its jewelled feathers meaningless compared to the living presence of the nightingale. In the days that followed, the emperor recovered completely. He did not abandon his treasures or the golden bird, but he no longer allowed them to overshadow what was real. He spent hours listening to the nightingale, walking quietly in the garden to hear its song as it moved freely among the trees. He learned that life and joy cannot be bought or forced, that the heart responds only to what is sincere and living. He also learned to respect the nightingale's freedom. It sang not because it was commanded, but because it wanted to, and the emperor could only enjoy its gift by accepting its nature. The courtiers, too, noticed the change. They saw the emperor smile more, move more lightly, and speak more kindly. The court was quieter in some ways, because the need for displays of wealth seemed smaller in the presence of genuine beauty. The nightingale continued to sing in the palace garden, but only sometimes, as it wished. It was no longer a captive of admiration or desire. Its song returned to the palace only when it was drawn by true need or true appreciation, and in that it remained free, a reminder that life itself cannot be constrained. Over time, the emperor came to treasure the small things that he had once ignored. He watched the flowers grow. He noticed the wind on his face. He listened to the rustle of leaves and the laughter of birds. He came to understand that joy, love, and meaning could not be contained in a cage, displayed in gold, or repeated by a machine. They existed in life, in nature, and in the moments when one truly paused to listen. The nightingale, small and plain, had shown him more than all the riches of the world combined. Its song had taught him humility, gratitude, and the wonder of simple, living beauty. The emperor never forgot the lessons of the nightingale. The mechanical bird remained in the palace, admired for its craftsmanship, but it no longer held the emperor's heart. Instead, the little brown bird, alive with song, became a constant companion in spirit, appearing when it wished, reminding all who heard it that life and art are at their best when they are sincere and free. The palace, though still grand, was no longer just a home of gold and jewels. It became a place where living music could be heard, where beauty could not be bought, and where the emperor had learned the most valuable treasure of all, the understanding that the smallest, simplest creatures can carry the greatest lessons. And so, the emperor lived the rest of his days with a new sense of peace, listening whenever the nightingale chose to sing, and remembering that the most enduring gifts are not those that shine in gold or sparkle with jewels, but those that come from life itself. The nightingale remained in the palace garden, sometimes unseen, sometimes perched near the windowsill, always singing freely. Its song reminded the emperor, and anyone who stopped to listen, that true beauty cannot be forced, that love cannot be bought, and that the simplest melodies often carry the greatest power. In a land of endless winter nights and golden summer days, where the wind carries secrets across frozen mountains and deep forests whisper of magic, there lived a tale older than memory. It is the story of a young girl who journeys far beyond the reaches of the ordinary world to a place where the sun never touches and the moon never sleeps. There she encounters enchanted castles, mysterious creatures, and a love both strange and powerful. A love that will demand courage she never knew she had. This is the story of East of the Sun and West of the Moon. The girl was the youngest of 3 daughters, and in her family the winter always seemed the longest season of all. Her father, a man worn thin by the cold winds and the uncertain yields of hunting and trade, did what he could to keep the hearth warm and the table set. Their home was small, made of rough-hewn timber, with a roof patched in places where snow had found its way through in years past. Inside, the fire struggled against the chill that crept through the walls, and the scent of smoked fish and wood smoke lingered in every corner. Despite the hardship, there was a quiet sense of care and resilience in the household, each member finding a small comfort in the routine of survival. The girl herself was curious and quiet, often wandering outside to watch the snow fall, and the wind bent the trees as though they were bowing to some unseen power. She would follow the tracks of animals in the white fields, imagining their secret lives, and sometimes she would dream of distant lands where snow might be soft and sunlight warm even in winter. Her older sisters were more practical, helping their mother with chores or learning to sew and mend. The girl, however, was different. She seemed to notice the world in ways others did not, and the forest seemed to respond to her presence, as if it recognized a certain carefulness in her steps. One day, as her father returned from the market with a small cart of goods, he spoke of an encounter unlike any he had ever known. While walking along a frozen path through woods, he had come across a great white wolf, its fur shimmering under weak winter sunlight, its eyes unnaturally bright. The wolf had not run away as animals usually did, but had approached him with a strange intelligence. It spoke, not with words, but with a force that seemed to press itself into his mind, and offered him a reward. Anything he wanted, the wolf said, could be his. But in exchange, it demanded a promise, not from him, but from his youngest daughter. He did not understand why, and he did not ask. He only knew he must agree, for the wolf's presence carried a weight heavier than reason. The girl's father returned home in a daze, the snow crunching beneath his boots, and told his family of the strange encounter. Fear and curiosity spread through the household. The older sisters were frightened by the thought of the wolf's demand, but the girl herself felt a strange pull, a mixture of apprehension and wonder. She didn't fully understand why, but she did not resist when her father spoke of the promise she must give. It was as though a part of her had always known this moment would come. The next morning, the wolf appeared at their doorstep. It was taller than any wolf she had seen, and its presence seemed to make the wind still and the snow quiet around it. Without hesitation, it took the girl by the hand, not roughly, but with a firmness that suggested both care and authority. She followed it through the forest, over frozen streams and steep cliffs, until the trees thinned and the land opened to reveal a sight that took her breath away. There, perched atop a jagged mountain, was a castle that seemed to grow from the stone itself. Its towers spiraled high into the grey sky, each window glowing with an inner light that shifted between pale gold and soft silver. Icicles hung like crystal chandeliers from the edges of its roofs, and the walls shimmered faintly, as though they were alive and aware of her presence. The wolf led her through heavy wooden gates, which opened without a sound, and into the castle. Inside, the air was warm and rich, with a scent of burning logs and something faintly floral, though no flowers could be seen. The walls were adorned with tapestries that depicted landscapes she had never known, mountains taller than clouds and rivers that flowed with light. Stairs wound upwards in spirals that seemed endless, and halls stretched farther than the eye could reach. The girl wandered, enchanted and wary, her hands brushing against the smooth stone of the walls as if seeking reassurance. Here, she realized, was a world apart from her simple home, a place that belonged to neither the living nor the entirely imagined. At night, she was not alone. In the quiet of her room, when all else had fallen asleep, the wolf would enter, not on 4 legs, but on 2. In the dim candlelight, his shape unfolded into that of a young man, tall and pale, with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of longing and sorrow. He did not speak, but she understood, in some way beyond words, that he was under a curse. By day he could only be a wolf, but by night, when shadows hid the world from sight, he could reclaim his human form. He moved with care around her room, as if aware of her presence and her gaze, and she learned to watch without fear. The castle, though grand and beautiful, carried a stillness that felt almost like waiting, and she understood that she too was part of that waiting. Days passed, and the girl settled into the rhythms of the castle. Meals were laid before her in golden bowls, and she could wander the halls and towers freely. The wolf, or prince, was a constant yet distant companion. She began to hear whispers of other lands, stories carried on the wind or in the flicker of candle flames. One spoke of a place far away, east of the sun and west of the moon, where an enchantress held the secret to breaking the curse. The idea of such a land seemed impossible, yet the stories felt urgent, as if destiny itself had begun to murmur in her ears. She thought of her family, of the snowbound fields she had left behind, but she also felt a growing tension, a pull towards the unknown. She became aware of a loneliness that the castle's splendour couldn't fill. The prince was near, but always apart, bound by the curse that shadowed his days. She began to ask questions in her mind about freedom, about the world beyond the castle, about whether love could exist in such a strange and constrained life. And then, one evening, as the shadows stretched long across the walls and the candle flames flickered low, a voice, not the wolf's, not human, not animal, but something that seemed to come from the stones themselves, warned her. The curse was fragile. It could not be broken too soon. And if she acted hastily, if she allowed curiosity or longing to push her beyond patience, the prince might be lost to her forever. The words were like a cold wind against her heart, and she understood that a choice lay before her: to wait in the safety of the castle, with its beauty and loneliness, or to embark on a journey that might carry her east of the sun and west of the moon, where danger and hope both awaited. And so the girl stayed awake that night, listening to the wind through the towers and the soft breath of the prince in his wolf form. She knew the journey would not be easy, that it would test her courage and patience, but she also knew that nothing in the castle, no warmth, no luxury, no fleeting companionship, could satisfy the pull she now felt. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, beyond snow and stone, lay a world where the answers waited, where the curse could be broken, and where she might find the prince as more than a shadow in the dark. She could almost see it in her mind's eye, a land of endless light and strange enchantments, a place that existed between the impossible and the imagined. She did not yet know how she would reach it, only that she must, if she wished to see the wolf in the full truth of his humanity. Night turned into day, and day back into night, but the castle remained in its stillness, beautiful and silent. The girl wandered the halls, sometimes catching glimpses of the prince, sometimes hearing the soft rustle of his paws on the stone. She understood that she was no longer the girl who had followed her father through the snowy woods. She had become a traveller, though she had not yet left the castle, a seeker of mysteries that demanded patience and courage in equal measure. And while the world outside waited in its white coldness, inside the castle she felt the stirrings of a journey that would take her far from everything she knew, toward a land so distant and strange that it existed only on the breathless spaces between sun and moon. She would need to be clever, brave, and patient. The path was hidden, the danger real, and yet the promise of love and freedom whispered to her in every quiet corner of the castle. And so, with the wolf at once near and just beyond reach, she began to dream not only of what lay within the castle walls, but of the land far away, where the curse could be undone, where the impossible might be real. In her heart, she carried the knowledge that her journey was only beginning. The girl left the castle at dawn, stepping into a world that seemed colder and more vast than anything she had known. The snow stretched endlessly, and the mountains rose like frozen walls, their peaks hidden in clouds. She carried only what she could hold in her hands, a small satchel with food, a warm cloak, and the gifts the prince had secretly given her, a charm of silver and a small crystal that glowed faintly, pulsing with a light she did not understand. She walked with steady determination, though every step was a struggle. Snowdrifts swallowed her boots, rivers ran fast and icy, and the forest tangled around her like a living net. She learned quickly that the journey was not one to rush. Haste would only bring misfortune. The first challenge came in the form of a river swollen by melting ice. The current was swift, and the banks were steep. She tried to leap across small rocks, but the icy water rushed too fast for her balance. Panic fluttered in her chest, but she remembered the crystal. Holding it in her hand, she concentrated, and the light pulsed stronger, guiding her to a fallen tree that stretched across the river. Carefully, she stepped across, testing each branch before placing her weight, and reached the other side with numb toes and a racing heart. The river had tested her cleverness and her patience, and she had passed. Days and nights blended into one another as she traversed the forest. She slept in hollowed trees and under rock overhangs, surviving on what she could find: berries, nuts, and the occasional fish caught in a shallow stream. She grew tired and hunger gnawed at her, yet she refused to turn back. On the third night, when the stars shone dimly behind clouds, a strange figure appeared at the edge of her camp. It was a small bird with feathers that shimmered gold and green, unlike any bird she had seen. It spoke not with words but with gestures, flying in a circle above her and dropping a small seed that glowed faintly. The girl planted the seed, and it sprouted into a tiny tree that bent and curved to form a bridge over a deep, hidden chasm the next morning. The forest seemed to reward her courage and willingness to notice the small wonders hidden in the world. As she climbed higher into the mountains, the air thinned and the cold bit at her skin. Wolves howled in the distance, though none approached her, and strange shapes moved behind trees, neither fully animal nor human. Yet she pressed onward, remembering the prince and the prophecy of the curse. The mountains tested her strength, forcing her to scale cliffs with only a narrow path or shimmy along ridges that seemed ready to crumble beneath her. Once, a sudden storm struck. Snow and wind so fierce she could barely see her own hands. She huddled behind a rock, shivering, and whispered into the cold, asking for guidance. The charm from the prince grew warm in her hand, as though acknowledging her plea. When the storm passed, she found herself at the edge of a valley that glowed with an ethereal light. In that valley, she met another helper, a giant with eyes like molten gold and hands rough as stone. He spoke in a voice that rumbled through the mountains, telling her she would face trials that could only be overcome by cleverness, courage, and the purity of heart. He gave her a cloak that allowed her to move unseen, a gift she would need in the final trials, and pointed toward a distant peak where the sun and moon seemed to touch the horizon. The girl thanked him, and though his form was frightening, she understood that even the strange and dangerous creatures of this world could be allies if approached with care and honesty. Finally, after long days of walking and nights of dreaming by firelight, she reached the castle east of the sun and west of the moon. It was unlike any place she had seen: walls of glass and silver, towers that spiraled impossibly high, and gardens suspended in mid-air. The wind carried voices that were not quite words, a strange harmony that made her ears ache and her heart race. The enchantress who ruled the castle appeared before her, tall and regal, with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She spoke only once, not in words but in the weight of her presence, presenting a series of challenges. Doors that led nowhere, riddles written in frost on windows, and paths that seemed to twist back upon themselves, tested the girl's mind and resolve. Each trial demanded a part of her she had not known she possessed. She had to trust her instincts, solve puzzles without guidance, and move with both speed and caution. At one point, She was confronted by a mirror that showed her deepest fears: the prince lost forever, the castle of her family in ruin, her own failure exposed. The girl trembled but pressed on, remembering the warmth of the wolf's eyes at night and the kindness of those who had helped her along the way. She spoke softly to herself, affirming her courage, and stepped forward through the mirror, leaving fear behind. At last, she entered a chamber bathed in light both golden and pale. The enchantress watched silently, and the girl knelt before a pedestal that held a crystal similar to the one the prince had given her. She placed her hands on it, thinking only of the wolf, of the castle she had left behind, and of the long journey that had brought her here. The crystal glowed brighter and brighter, until the walls of the chamber seemed to vanish, leaving only the warmth of a presence she recognized immediately. The wolf appeared, and as the light touched him, his form shifted from beast to man, fully human, unbound by the curse that had imprisoned him for so long. The girl rose, feeling a strange mixture of awe and relief, knowing that patience, courage, and cleverness had brought them together. The prince and the girl embraced, but there was no need for words. Each knew the other's heart, the trials they had endured, and the bond that had carried them across mountains and valleys. The enchantress watched briefly, then vanished into the air, leaving the castle quiet, still, and strangely empty. They were free, yet the journey back remained, and the mountains and forests that had tested her courage before would now be familiar in a different way, as places of memory and endurance rather than only of fear. As they descended from the mountains, the girl understood that love, trust, and freedom were not gifts that came without effort. The curse had been broken, yet the challenges of life beyond magic would still demand patience, care, and understanding. The wolf, now fully the prince, walked beside her, a companion and equal, bound not by enchantment, but by mutual courage and respect. The journey east of the sun and west of the moon had ended, but the lessons it had brought, the need for bravery, cleverness, and heart, would guide them forever. Though they returned to the familiar lands of snow and woods, the girl carried the knowledge of the impossible and the extraordinary. She knew that even in ordinary life, magic could be found in courage, kindness, and determination. The mountains and rivers had tested her, and she had not failed. The prince, once lost to a cruel curse, was now hers in a new way, and together they faced the future with a quiet confidence, aware that love and life were journeys of patience, endurance, and heart, just as much as the path that had led them to the land beyond sun and moon. The castle of the enchantress faded behind them, a memory of light and challenge, while the world ahead spread vast and unknowable, full of both ordinary days and extraordinary possibilities. They walked forward, not in haste, but with steady steps, carrying the knowledge that what they had endured had changed them forever, and that the journey, though over, had only just begun in the lessons it left behind. In a kingdom far beyond ordinary maps, where forests whispered secrets to the wind and rivers carried stories of old, there lived a king and his 12 children. Among them was a princess whose heart was as gentle as morning dew, and whose life was about to be touched by magic both cruel and wondrous. This was a story of love, courage, and sacrifice, where the bond of family could withstand even the most terrible enchantments, and where hope moved in silence, waiting for those brave enough to trust it. Journey now into the tale of swans, thorns, and a sister whose determination would bend the fate of a kingdom. Once, in a kingdom that rested between gentle hills and wide silver rivers, there lived a king with 12 children, 11 sons and a daughter. The princess, the youngest, was delicate in frame but strong in spirit. Her brothers were lively and bold, full of laughter that rang through the corridors of the castle like the song of the wind in the trees. The castle itself was a place of quiet wonders, with tall towers that caught the morning sun, gardens where flowers bowed in the breeze, and halls lined with tapestries that told stories older than the king's own memory. Each day was filled with simple joys. The children exploring the forest at the edge of the castle, their father teaching them the lessons of kingship and courage, and the warmth of a family that, at least for now, seemed safe from all shadows. This peace, however, could not last. One day the king returned from a journey with a queen who was not like the gentle ladies of the court. She had hair as dark as a raven's wing and eyes that glimmered with a cold fire. She spoke softly at first, praising the beauty of the princess and the skill of the princes, but beneath every word lay envy and ambition. Soon it became clear that her heart harboured no love for the children who were not hers. Her gaze lingered too long on the brothers, as though each smile they offered was a theft of the power she craved. The princess, young and tender, noticed the change on the air. Even the birds seemed to hush when the queen passed. Night after night, the queen whispered her dark spells, and slowly her magic wove itself through the castle. She waited for the moment when the king's attention wandered, when he looked at her as if she alone contained all wonder in the world. Then in the quiet hours before dawn, she struck. 11 princes, once laughing and free, were caught in the cruel grip of her sorcery. In a swirl of wind and shadow, their forms twisted and changed, feathers sprouting where flesh had been, wings unfurling from shoulders, and long necks arching in confusion and fright. By the time the princess awoke, the world seemed quieter. She found herself staring at the 11 swans resting in the castle gardens, their eyes familiar and fearful. For a moment she could not breathe. She pressed her hands to her mouth to stifle a cry that threatened to escape. Her brothers, trapped in the forms of birds, turned their heads toward her, and in their silent gaze she saw a mixture of fear and hope. The queen had not noticed her. Perhaps she had been spared because she was the youngest, or perhaps because the queen underestimated the quiet strength that lived in her small frame. Either way, the princess understood that the safety of her family now rested entirely on her own courage. The castle no longer felt like a home. Its corridors were heavy with the queen's presence, and the halls seemed to whisper warnings with every footstep. She could not speak freely, could not cry out, for the queen's power was always near. And yet she knew she must act. The princess vowed that she would do whatever it took to restore her brothers, even if it meant wandering the forests alone, enduring hunger, cold, and fear. She pressed her lips together and made a promise to herself that no sound would pass them until the curse was broken. Silence, she understood, was her first weapon. The next morning, she left the castle under the pretense of gathering herbs in the garden. She slipped through the gates while the queen's eyes were elsewhere, and the forest received her with an almost welcoming hush. Trees arched high above her, their leaves trembling like they understood the weight of her burden. Streams glimmered under the morning sun, and the soft moss under her feet seemed to cushion her passage, as though nature itself wished her well. She carried with her only what she could hold in her small hands, trusting the river and the woods to guide her. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, as the princess moved quietly through the forest. She learned the secret paths where deer tread lightly, and the clearings where the sun touched the earth just enough to keep her warm. Hunger came, and she ate roots, berries, and whatever the forest offered, always careful to remain gentle and not disturb the life around her. She slept beneath the trees, wrapped in her own courage, listening to the swans, her brothers, fly above, their calls faint but steady, guiding her through the dark hours. It was not an easy journey. Sometimes she felt that the forest itself tested her, throwing storms of rain or walls of thorns across her path. Other times strangers appeared, suspicious of her ragged clothes and quiet manner, but she moved on without a word, understanding that every encounter might betray her silence. She carried her sorrow with her, but also a fierce determination. Each step was a pledge. She would not fail her brothers, and she would not allow the queen's wickedness to triumph. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tallest pines and painted the sky in shades of rose and violet, the princess came to a clearing where a solitary figure waited. The figure seemed neither young nor old, cloaked in robes that shimmered like morning mist. Without speaking, the figure beckoned her closer. The princess approached, sensing in her heart that she had found the knowledge she so desperately needed. The figure showed her the nettles, their green leaves sharp and stinging, and revealed that these would be the key to breaking the curse. Each leaf, carefully gathered and woven into shirts for her brothers, held the power to restore them, but only if she endured the pain and remained silent until the last stitch was done. The princess listened, absorbing every instruction. She would have to endure long hours, her hands bleeding from the nettle's sting, her voice bound by a vow of silence, her heart heavy with longing. Yet she understood that this was the path set before her. The forest, the rivers, and the hidden corners of the world would witness her struggle, and each thread of nettle would become a testament to her love and courage. She watched the sun sink completely behind the horizon, leaving the stars to twinkle above the treetops, and she felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. The journey ahead would be difficult, perhaps more than she could imagine, but she would not turn back. In that moment, the princess realized that the curse was not merely a test of magic, but a test of her endurance and her devotion. Her brothers, though far and transformed, were not lost. The world had opened itself to her, offering secrets in the shadows and guidance in the stillness. And so, with the first stars of evening shining faintly on the leaves, she began to plan her work with the nettles, preparing herself for the long days of silence and pain that would come. The path to freeing her brothers stretched far and uncertain before her, but she no longer feared it. She had discovered what must be done, and though the queen's shadow still loomed, The princess now carried a spark of hope, quiet and resolute, that would not be extinguished. The princess began her work in silence. She moved through the forest at dawn, gathering the nettles whose leaves pricked and stung her fingers. Every touch drew blood, and every leaf seemed to carry its own resistance. Yet she continued. She plucked, tied, and dried them with hands that became raw and blistered, and at night she knelt on moss and stone, weaving the fibres into long green shirts that would fit her brother's tall, thin forms. The work was slow, painful, and exhausting. Often her fingers trembled and her arms ached from hours of bending and stretching. The forest watched over her, still and silent, as though it understood that she was not making ordinary clothes, but instruments of hope and love. The days were long, and the nights lonely. Villagers who passed near the forest saw her huddled among nettles and wildflowers, and whispered she was strange or bewitched. Some feared her, avoiding her path entirely, while others lingered for a moment, curious but wary. She never spoke, never explained herself, and continued her work without pause. Even when suspicion followed her, she kept her vow of silence. She could not risk the stepmother discovering her, for one word, one sound, might undo everything she had endured. Hunger came often, yet she ate what the forest offered with careful patience. Exhaustion weighed on her body, and despair hovered at the edges of her thoughts. But she forced herself onward. Every stitch, every thread was a promise to her brothers, and she refused to break it. The swans flew above, her brothers transformed but not forgotten. Each day she saw them circling in the sky, or gliding across the silver rivers, wings beating with longing. Their eyes, black and bright against white feathers, seemed to plead with her, urging her to continue. She felt their presence keenly, though they could not speak. She imagined their thoughts, their confusion, and their hope, and it made her own pain more bearable. The princess had once taken their laughter for granted, and now she understood how precious each moment had been. The knowledge of their suffering sharpened her resolve. The swans were more than brothers. They were part of her own heart, and she would endure anything to return them to their true forms. The forest itself became a companion in her work. Streams offered water and occasional fish to eat. Trees sheltered her from storms, and the wind carried the distant sound of her brother's wings. She learned to read the weather and follow the subtle signs of the earth, using its rhythms to guide her labour. Yet nature was not always kind. Storms tore at her frail shelter, branches fell across the path, and snow blanketed the ground in silence that was almost unbearable. Each day of labour became a test not only of her skill but of her courage, and she welcomed even the smallest victories. A shirt finished, a nettle tamed, a quiet moment where the forest seemed to acknowledge her efforts. Months passed, and the shirts grew in number. 10 of them were finished, each one painstakingly crafted from nettles, sharp as thorns, soft as forgiveness when woven. Her fingers bore permanent scars, and her skin was roughened by contact with the magical plants. She felt the weight of every stitch, as though each thread carried the memory of her brother's voices and her father's love. Sleep came in short spurts, and she dreamed often of her brothers' faces, alternating between hope and sorrow. Yet she remained steadfast, never wavering from the silence that protected them. Finally, the The last shirt lay nearly finished, stretched across a stone in the clearing where the princess worked. The forest seemed to hold its breath with her, sensing the climax of her sacrifice. She bent over it, hands bleeding from the final stitches, body trembling from fatigue and hunger. Her heart was full of longing and fear, for she understood that the curse would not be undone until the last stitch was complete and the last act of devotion performed. She pressed on, even as pain tore through her fingers and arms, repeating the vow in her mind that she had spoken aloud only to herself. Nothing, no voice, no cry, could escape until her brothers were free. As the last stitch was drawn tight, a strange hush fell over the forest. The wind ceased, the leaves stopped trembling, and the rivers seemed to pause in their flow. The princess rose slowly, lifting the shirt and stepping into the clearing where the swans waited. One by one, they landed on the soft grass, wings folding nervously against their sides. She placed the shirts over them, every thread touching feathered shoulders and elongated arms. And as the final shirt settled, a light shimmered over the clearing. It was gentle at first, like the glow of dawn, but it quickly grew stronger, encasing each swan in a soft brilliance. The transformation was instant and complete. Feathers receded, wings became arms, necks shortened into graceful human forms, and the 11 brothers stood once more as they had been before the stepmother's curse. They looked around, blinking at the sun, the trees, and finally at the princess who knelt before them, her hands red and swollen, her clothes torn, and her face pale but radiant with relief. For a moment, none of them spoke. The air was filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the quiet murmur of the river, and the kingdom itself seemed to breathe again. The stepmother's power was gone, dissolved by the strength and purity of the princess's love. The evil queen appeared once, her shadow twisting across the clearing, but she found herself powerless. Her magic repelled by the courage and sacrifice she had sought to suppress. She fled into the forest and was never heard from again, leaving the family to reclaim the peace that had once been their own. The brothers, though weary and astonished, gathered around the princess. She had endured months of pain, loneliness, and hardship to bring them back, and they knew that nothing could repay such devotion. The forest seemed to hum with approval. The rivers glistened in the sunlight, and the castle, once distant, awaited their return with open gates. As they walked together, the wind carried the faint sound of wings that were no longer theirs, a reminder of the trials that had tested their bond and the courage of the sister who had refused to falter. Back at the castle, the king wept silently at the sight of his children restored. The princess, though still marked by her trials, stood tall, proud of the love and perseverance that had saved them. The brothers laughed again, a sound brighter and deeper than before, knowing that they owed their lives to the quiet heroism of the youngest. And though the forest held memories of pain and hardship, it also held the memory of triumph and hope, a story that would be told for generations as a testament to the strength of love, endurance, and sacrifice. In the quiet moments that followed, the princess realized that her journey had changed her. She had learned that silence could protect, that pain could teach, and that the heart's courage could defeat even the darkest magic. She had discovered the depths of her own spirit and the strength that love can summon. And as the family sat together, reunited and whole, There was a sense that life, though fragile and fleeting, carried the quiet promise of hope, redemption, and a peace that was hard won but eternal. In a land where magic was as natural as the wind, and where kindness and curiosity could open doors that no key ever could, there lived a princess whose heart longed for something beyond the gilded walls of her palace. She was loved by all, yet she felt a strange emptiness she could not explain. One day, an enchanted bird of the most dazzling blue appeared in her life, setting off a chain of adventures that would test her courage, reveal the power of loyalty, and uncover secrets hidden in the most unexpected places. What seems like a simple story of a bird quickly becomes a tale of wonders, dangers, and discoveries that touch the heart and mind alike. In a kingdom where the walls of the palace gleamed like ivory in the sunlight, and the gardens were filled with flowers that seemed to bloom for no reason other than to delight the eyes, there lived a princess who was admired for her beauty and grace. She had golden hair that caught the light in the morning, and eyes that reflected the pale blue of the spring sky. Yet despite all the comforts and luxuries that surrounded her, the princess often felt a quiet restlessness, a longing for something she could not name. The halls of the palace, though grand and filled with laughter and music, seemed to echo with a hollow emptiness whenever she walked alone. She admired the splendour around her, the fine tapestries, the delicate porcelain, the soft carpets that muted her steps. But these things could not fill the quiet ache she felt within her heart. From an early age, the princess had been drawn to the world beyond the palace walls. She would linger by the tall windows that overlooked the surrounding forests, imagining what life might be like in the villages, by the streams, or beneath the broad branches of the ancient oaks, while her companions were content with the games and lessons offered within the palace. She wondered about the lives of those who walked the fields, the small joys and quiet sorrows of people she would never meet. She was gentle by nature, always noticing the smallest suffering. A bird with a broken wing in the garden, a gardener whose hands were blistered, a messenger tired from a long journey, and her heart ached to help, even when the palace rules made such small acts complicated. It was during one such morning, when the sun had barely climbed above the horizon and the gardens were still wet with dew, that the princess first saw the bluebird. She had been walking along the edge of a rose-bordered path when a flash of colour caught her eye. There, perched delicately on a low branch, was a bird unlike any she had seen before. Its feathers shimmered in shades of blue that seemed to shift with the light, from the deep colour of the evening sky to the bright cerulean of a summer morning. Its eyes held a strange intelligence, a knowing that seemed far beyond that of an ordinary creature. The princess approached slowly, feeling a mixture of awe and caution. The bird did not flinch nor fly away. Instead, it tilted its head and regarded her with curiosity, as though measuring whether she was worthy of its attention. From that moment, a bond formed between them, quiet and unspoken. The blue bird would follow her through the gardens, resting on her shoulder as she wandered among the fountains and statues, or perching on the windowsill when she read in the sunlight. Its presence brought her joy she had never known, and she found herself talking softly to it, telling it about her thoughts, her dreams, and her hopes, though it never answered with words. Still she felt that it understood her, that it somehow reflected back her own longing and wonder. The king, her father, noticed the change in his daughter. He was a ruler who valued appearances and order, who liked the world to run smoothly according to the plan he had set. He watched as the princess lingered by the bird, smiling more than she had in years, her days brighter and her steps lighter. The bird, he realized, was no ordinary creature, though he could not say why. There was a sparkle in its feathers that seemed almost magical, and a gleam in its eyes that suggested secrets not meant for human understanding. Though he was proud that his daughter had found a companion, he could not help but worry that such fascination might lead her into trouble. One day, without warning, the bluebird vanished. The princess searched the gardens from dawn to dusk, calling softly, hoping to hear the familiar trill of its song. She asked the gardeners and the servants if they had seen it, but no one had. The windows remained empty, the branches bare, and a sorrow settled over her that made the world seem dull and grey. She realized that the bird had not just been a creature of beauty, it had been a friend, a companion, a confidant. Its disappearance left a void that no amount of royal luxury could fill. Determined to find the bird, the princess resolved to leave the safety of her home. She gathered what she could carry, some food, a cloak, and a small satchel with a few essentials, and set out at dawn, guided only by intuition and the faintest hints of where the bird might have gone. She followed the directions of small signs. A feather caught in the bushes, a faint song carried on the wind, a path slightly worn as if someone or something had passed recently. Each clue strengthened her resolve and reminded her that this was no ordinary journey. As she ventured further, the landscapes changed. The familiar gardens and manicured grounds gave way to wild meadows and tangled woods. Shadows stretched longer in the trees, and strange sounds whispered from unseen places. The princess pressed on, mindful of the dangers she might encounter. Though she felt fear, she also felt a growing sense of courage. She remembered the bird's steady gaze, as though it had faith in her, and she drew strength from that silent confidence. The forest she entered was dark and dense, with towering oaks and twisting vines that blocked the sunlight. The air smelled of earth and moss, and the ground was soft and uneven beneath her feet. Every step required care, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent her heart racing. She encountered creatures that made her pause, small animals with bright, curious eyes, and shadows that seemed to shift and follow her. Yet the princess did not waver. She had never wanted an easy path. She had always longed to see and understand a world beyond her own comforts. In time, she realized that this journey was more difficult than she had imagined. It demanded patience, courage, and careful observation. She could not rely on the palace guards, nor on servants to guide her. She had only herself, her determination, and the hope that the blue bird was waiting somewhere ahead. Nights were the hardest, when the darkness seemed absolute and the sounds of the forest unfamiliar and threatening. She would make a small fire and watch the flames, imagining the bird perched nearby, as if it had simply paused to observe her courage. One morning, after days of travel, the princess crested a hill and saw, far in the distance, a castle unlike any she had known. Its towers were tall and slender, glimmering faintly in the morning light, with flags that fluttered despite the calm air. The walls were adorned with vines and flowers, but there was a subtle magic in the air that made the hair on her arms rise. Her heart leapt as she realized that the bluebird might be within those walls. She could see tiny flashes of blue among the turrets and balconies, and she knew that her journey, while far from over, had led her to the place she had been seeking. The sight of the distant castle filled her with hope and determination. Though she had faced the uncertainty of the forest, the strange creatures, and the unknown path ahead, she now had a clear goal. The bird was not lost forever, and perhaps this castle, mysterious as it was, held the answers she sought. She tightened the cloak around her shoulders, adjusted her satchel, and took a deep breath, ready to continue. The road ahead promised further challenges, but also the chance to uncover the magic and mystery that had first drawn her to the bluebird. With courage in her heart and hope guiding her steps, she began her descent toward the castle, unaware of the wonders and trials that awaited her beyond its gates. The princess's journey had only just begun, and though the palace seemed a distant memory, the lessons she had learned about patience, bravery, and the power of quiet understanding would carry her forward. The bluebird had led her out of the familiar and into a world of enchantment, and she was determined to see it through, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The princess's heart beat faster as she approached the castle, its towers shimmering faintly with a strange light that seemed alive, almost breathing with magic. The closer she came, the more she noticed the subtle enchantments woven into the walls and gates. The stone glimmered as though dusted with tiny diamonds, and the ivy that clung to the towers shimmered with colours that shifted with every step. Birds sang in the trees along the path, but they were no ordinary birds. They spoke in whispers and riddles, their songs carrying hints of guidance and warning. Small animals appeared at her with intelligent eyes, and flowers turned their heads as she passed, leaning toward her as if curious about the princess who dared to enter this enchanted place. She walked carefully through the castle's outer gardens, which were more like a maze than a welcoming path. Trees with silver bark twisted into arches overhead, and fountains bubbled with water that reflected the light in strange iridescent patterns. Some paths seemed to shift when she looked away, diverting her steps and making the gardens feel endless. A soft voice, musical and faint, drifted through the air, giving her gentle instructions to choose the path that felt right. Though the warnings were mysterious and indirect, the princess felt guided by them, remembering the trust she had placed in her instincts during the forest. Soon, she reached a courtyard where a small group of animals gathered. They spoke to her in clear, deliberate tones, asking questions and offering advice. A fox with a coat of deep russet and eyes like amber told her that the bluebird was under a spell, a curse placed by a powerful sorceress who had long envied the joy and loyalty the bird brought. The fox explained that the spell could not be broken by force or by gold, but only through acts of courage, cleverness, and selfless kindness. The princess listened carefully, absorbing every word. Though the task seemed daunting, she felt no hesitation. Her determination to rescue the bird outweighed any fear of the challenges ahead. She was led by the animals to the first test, a small but dense garden where the paths twisted and led to hidden traps. Flowers that looked delicate concealed thorny vines, and stepping off the narrow stone path meant facing sudden tangles of brambles. Here, the princess learned patience. She moved slowly, observing the subtle patterns of the garden, noticing the gentle hum of magic in the air. She discovered that kindness could unlock pathways. When she spoke softly to the plants, praising their beauty and touching them gently, the thorns seemed to shrink away, allowing her to pass. Each careful step, each small act of attentiveness, taught her to move with awareness and empathy, realizing that courage was not only in facing danger, but in approaching it with respect and care. The second challenge was more puzzling than perilous. She entered a hall where the walls were mirrors, each reflecting endless versions of herself. Some reflections frowned or laughed, while others seemed entirely unfamiliar. She had to choose the path that led to the centre without being deceived by the illusions. Here, clever thinking became essential. The princess noticed that only the reflections that mirrored her gentle, true self were aligned with the path she sought. By trusting her heart and intuition, she discerned the correct passage, learning that self-awareness and clarity could guide her through deception. Finally, she reached a tower at the heart of the castle, the place the animals had said the bluebird was kept. The door was guarded by a creature of formidable presence, a large, shadowy figure whose form shifted like smoke. Its eyes glowed with the light of storms, and its voice rumbled like distant thunder, warning that no one could pass unless they proved their worth. The princess understood that this was the climax of her trials. She approached with a mixture of bravery and calm, offering no fear, no hesitation. She spoke gently to the guardian, acknowledging its strength and the importance of its duty. Then, guided by the lessons she had learned, she acted with courage, performing the small, thoughtful deeds that the guardian seemed to test, showing patience, kindness, and respect. The shadows of the guardian receded, as if recognizing her heart, and the door opened silently, revealing the room beyond. Inside, perched on a golden stand, was the blue bird. Its feathers, though brilliant as ever, seemed tinged with sadness, its eyes reflecting a longing for freedom. The princess approached carefully, and the bird leaned into her hand as though it recognized her immediately. She spoke softly, promising care and companionship, and then followed the instructions the animals had given. She whispered words of encouragement, acknowledged the bird's trials, and offered a pledge of loyalty and understanding. Slowly, the magic that had bound the bird began to unravel. The feathers shimmered with a brighter light. The sadness lifted from its eyes, and the form of a young man emerged, delicate and graceful, yet imbued with a quiet strength. The transformation completed, and the bird was no more. In its place stood a prince, tall and noble, with eyes that reflected the depth of gratitude and relief. He had been cursed long ago by the sorceress, who envied the joy his presence brought to others. The princess had freed him not by force or wealth, but by embodying courage, kindness, and cleverness, qualities that the spell had demanded. The prince, now restored to his true self, bowed before her, not in formal deference, but in recognition of the trials she had endured and the heart she had shown. Though the prince was free, the castle remained a place of wonder and magic. The gardens continued to shift gently, the animals continued to speak in soft tones, and the air shimmered with enchantment. The princess realized that the journey had changed her as much as it had the prince. She understood herself more fully, recognized the strength in gentleness, and learned that bravery could take many forms, from the courage to face darkness to the quiet persistence of patience and insight. Together, the princess and the prince left the castle, walking through the gardens that now seemed to welcome them with warmth and light. The animals accompanied them partway, offering advice and blessings for the path ahead. Though they had overcome the trials and broken the curse, the story was not truly over. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where understanding, loyalty, and the shared joy of discovery would shape their lives. They walked in quiet companionship, hearts aligned by the lessons of the journey, and the bond forged through courage and kindness. As the palace came into view on the horizon, the princess felt no longing for the safety of her former life. She carried with her the knowledge that true adventure and growth were found not in comfort, but in seeking the unknown with a heart open to magic and understanding. The prince walked beside her, now able to share fully in the world he had long been denied, and together they began a life enriched by the trials they had faced and the compassion that had guided them. The bluebird had been more than a creature of magic. It had been a guide, a test, and a symbol of hope. And in freeing it, the princess and the prince had discovered the deeper magic of courage, kindness, and loyalty, not just as tools to break a spell, but as the very foundation of a life well lived. Though their adventures would continue beyond the tale, they now faced the world with hearts aligned, ready to embrace wonder, mystery, and the quiet, enduring power of understanding. In a time when kingdoms rose and fell on the whims of kings and the courage of princes, there existed a tale so strange that it walked the line between reality and enchantment. It spoke of a king with 3 sons, a castle filled with wonders, and a mysterious white cat whose secret power could change the fate of all who crossed her path. This was not a story of ordinary courage or simple luck, but one of hidden wisdom, impossible challenges, and the quiet strength of a creature no one suspected. As you journey into this story, be ready to leave behind the familiar and enter a world where the smallest actions and the most unlikely companions hold the keys to destiny. Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled over a fair and prosperous kingdom. He was a wise man, but the years had begun to weigh heavily upon him, and he knew that his reign would soon come to an end. The king had 3 sons, each very different from the others. The eldest was tall and handsome, and he carried himself with a proud air that often made others feel small. He was clever in his own way, but his cleverness was often clouded by arrogance. The second son was quick of mind and had a sharp tongue. He loved solving puzzles and thinking ahead, yet he had little patience for those who could not keep up with him. The youngest, in contrast, was quiet and gentle. He did not seek attention or praise. He was thoughtful, humble, and careful, always considering the feelings of others and observing the world with curiosity rather than ambition. As the king grew older, he faced a difficult decision. Though the eldest was strong and the second was intelligent, neither displayed the wisdom or virtue that he believed necessary to lead the kingdom well. He decided that rather than choosing based on appearance or skill, he would set each son a challenge. These would be impossible quests, he thought, designed to reveal the character of each prince and determine who was truly worthy to inherit the throne. The first quest he gave was to retrieve a golden branch that could only be found in the heart of a dangerous forest, where no man had ever returned. The eldest and second sons set off at once, each confident in his own ability. The eldest believed that strength and authority would carry him through, while the second believed that intelligence alone could solve any problem. Both were gone for weeks, and though they returned with stories of narrow escapes and clever tricks, neither had achieved the king's task entirely. The golden branch remained out of reach, and the king saw that neither pride nor cleverness alone could suffice. Then it was the youngest son's turn. Though he understood the danger, he did not rush forward with bravado. He listened carefully to the king's words, considered the forest, and set out with a calm mind. His journey led him through lands both familiar and strange, over hills and rivers, and into forests that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Days passed, and he travelled far from home, guided not by strength or impatience, but by careful thought and quiet observation. One afternoon, after wandering deeper into the woods than he had ever gone before, he came upon a palace unlike any he had seen. It gleamed in the sunlight, its walls white as marble, with towers rising high into the sky. Yet there was something strange about it. No guards patrolled the grounds, no servants hurried through the halls, and the gate stood open as if inviting him in. At the entrance he noticed a white cat sitting with perfect composure upon the steps. Its fur was as pure and soft as fresh snow, and its eyes glowed with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The prince approached cautiously, unsure if this was an ordinary cat or something more. To his surprise, the cat spoke, not in a meow, but in words that were clear and gentle. She welcomed him to her palace and assured him that he would find help here for his quest. Her voice was soft, yet it carried authority and wisdom beyond her appearance. The prince, who had never expected to find counsel from a cat, felt immediately at ease. Inside the palace, he saw wonders he had never imagined. The rooms were filled with treasures from every corner of the world, but they were arranged with a peculiar order that suggested careful thought and purpose. The floors were polished to a mirror-like shine, reflecting tapestries that seemed to tell stories of their own. Statues of great leaders and heroes lined the halls, each with eyes that seemed almost alive. Yet throughout it all, the cat moved with quiet grace, attending to the smallest detail while remaining aware of everything around her. The white cat offered the prince a series of tasks. At first, they seemed simple. Arrange the palace's treasures according to patterns only she could see, find hidden objects in the gardens, or carry messages to creatures who spoke in riddles. Yet he quickly discovered that each task had layers of complexity. They required patience to observe, cleverness to understand, and respect to approach correctly. Unlike his brothers, he did not rush or seek shortcuts. He treated the cat's instructions with care, asking questions when needed and listening to the subtle guidance she offered. Days turned into weeks as he worked on these challenges. With each completed task, he grew wiser and more confident, yet he never allowed pride to enter his heart. The white cat watched him closely, her glowing eyes seeming to measure not only his skill, but also his character. The prince noticed that she sometimes disappeared for hours, only to return with knowledge or tools that made his tasks possible. He suspected that there was more to her than met the eye, and he treated her with gratitude and respect, even though he did not yet understand the depth of her secret. The palace itself became a place of learning. The gardens taught him patience, the treasures taught him discernment, and the cat taught him subtlety. She had a quiet way of encouraging him to notice things others overlooked, to act thoughtfully, and to consider the consequences of his choices. The prince discovered that some tasks that seemed impossible were solved not by force or speed, but by observing the smallest details, showing kindness to creatures along the way, and understanding the hidden logic of the palace and its mysteries. The more he worked under the white cat's guidance, the more he realized the failures of his brothers. Their pride and impatience had made them blind to subtle truths, and even cleverness could not compensate for their lack of wisdom. In contrast, he learned to rely on both thought and feeling, using his head and his heart together. Each small success built his confidence and deepened his understanding, preparing him for challenges far greater than any he had yet faced. Finally, the white cat summoned him for a task unlike the others. It was a mission that required courage, insight, and an unshakable sense of fairness. She explained that its completion would bring him closer to the truth she had long hidden, and would reveal secrets that would change everything he knew about the palace, the kingdom, and even herself. The prince listened carefully, aware that this was no ordinary challenge. It demanded not only skill, but also trust, for it would require him to act on guidance that could not be fully explained. With the mission laid before him, the prince felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He understood that the journey was far from over, and that the most important lesson still awaited. Yet, he also felt a quiet assurance, born from weeks of learning under the white cat's watchful eyes. He had grown in ways he could not have imagined when he first set out from his father's castle. He had discovered patience, cleverness tempered with humility, and the strength of kindness as a tool as powerful as any sword or spell. As he prepared to leave for the next stage of his quest, the palace seemed to shimmer with possibilities. The white cat watched silently, her eyes gleaming with a hint of secrets yet to be revealed. The prince knew that whatever lay ahead, he could face it with courage, wisdom, and the quiet confidence that comes from truly understanding the world around him. The tasks he had completed were only the beginning. What awaited him now promised to uncover truths, not only about the palace and the cat, but also about himself, and perhaps even about the fate of his kingdom. And so, with the sun dipping low over the distant hills, the youngest prince took his first steps toward a mission that would test everything he had learned. Behind him, the palace remained silent yet alive with magic, and the white cat returned to her hidden chambers, keeping her secrets safe for the moment, ready to reveal them when the time was right. The forest stretched ahead, mysterious and full of challenges, and the prince moved forward with hope, courage, and the knowledge that he was no longer the same young man who had left his father's castle. The story of the youngest prince and the white cat had begun, and the greatest mysteries were still waiting to be discovered. The youngest prince moved through the forest with determination, carrying the white cat's instructions carefully in his mind. The tasks she had set were unlike any he had faced before. They were no longer simple puzzles or hidden objects, but challenges that demanded courage, insight, and judgment. Along the path, he encountered enchanted creatures and magical obstacles that would have terrified any ordinary traveller. Some paths vanished and reappeared only when he approached them with patience. Streams shifted their courses, and rocks rose to block his way. Yet each challenge held a lesson, and the prince learned to observe, to wait, and to act with wisdom rather than haste. At one point, he came upon a bridge that stretched across a chasm of swirling mist. The planks were thin and worn, and no handrail existed to steady him. As he prepared to cross, he noticed the shadows of small, invisible creatures flickering at the edges of his vision. These were not malevolent beings, but guardians testing whether he could maintain balance and composure. He stepped lightly, trusting his observations and moving slowly. Halfway across, the bridge trembled violently, and the mist below seemed to rise like a living thing, threatening to swallow him. Yet he remembered the lessons the white cat had taught him about calmness and careful attention. He breathed steadily, placed each foot deliberately, and reached the other side safely. The mist faded, revealing a path that led him onward, a path that had been invisible to those who rushed or doubted themselves. Further along, he entered a glade where every tree bore fruit unlike any he had seen. Golden apples gleamed beside silver pears, and grapes hung in clusters of translucent ruby. At first, the prince thought this was a reward, but then he remembered the white cat's words. Not everything that shines is meant to be grasped. When he tried to pick the fruit, invisible hands pushed them out of reach. He realized that to succeed, he must understand not only the rules of the magical world, but also the intentions behind them. He observed the trees, noticed patterns in the branches, and waited until the fruits ripened in a natural order. By acting in harmony with the glade's rhythm, rather than forcing his own, he collected exactly what the challenge required, proving that patience and respect were as important as cleverness. As he progressed, the prince began to notice subtle signs of the white cat's hidden life. Sometimes a delicate melody drifted through the air, though no instrument was visible. Sometimes a book would open by itself on a pedestal, its pages displaying instructions or guidance that could only have come from someone extraordinarily learned. The palace and its treasures, which had seemed merely opulent, now revealed themselves as symbols of wisdom and magic. The cat's silence and restraint were not ordinary behaviour. She carried the knowledge of spells, enchantments, and secrets too powerful for a human alone to wield. The prince's respect and humility allowed him to follow these signs and learn without fear or arrogance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the palace shimmered in the twilight, the white cat approached him with a task unlike any before. He was to enter the deepest chamber of the palace, a place hidden behind doors that only opened when one's heart was pure and intentions true. The prince did not hesitate or question. He knew the lessons he had learned would guide him. As he passed through the doors, he found a mirror unlike any other, its surface reflecting not only his own image, but also the faint outline of another figure. The cat's form shimmered in the glass, and suddenly, as if a veil had been lifted, her secret became clear. The white cat was no ordinary creature. She had once been a princess, renowned for her beauty, intelligence, and grace, but a wicked enchantment had transformed her into a cat, hiding her in this magical palace to protect her from those who would harm her or seize her wealth. Her treasures and the wonders of the palace had been part of the spell, disguising her true identity from the world. Only someone who combined courage, cleverness, patience, and kindness could break the enchantment and see her as she truly was. The prince had passed every test, not by force, but by understanding the deeper meaning behind each challenge, demonstrating virtues that no one else had. With this realization, the prince acted not with greed or impatience, but with compassion and trust. He approached the white cat with gentleness, acknowledging her dignity and the wisdom she had shared. In a moment that shimmered with magic, the cat's fur softened into flowing hair, her small frame expanding into that of a tall and graceful princess. The palace seemed to breathe with her liberation, its treasures no longer mere objects, but symbols of her regained freedom and power. The prince and the princess regarded each other with mutual respect, recognizing that their journey together had forged a bond far deeper than friendship or alliance. Together they returned to the prince's kingdom. Along the way, he reflected on everything he had learned. The lessons were clear. Humility, patience, cleverness, and kindness were far more powerful than pride or impatience. The eldest and second brothers, though skilled in their own ways, had failed because they lacked balance, unable to see beyond their own ambition or desire for quick success. In contrast, the youngest son had proven himself worthy not only through action, but through character. And now he bore the wisdom to lead with justice and insight. When they arrived, the king welcomed them both. The youngest son was recognized as the rightful heir, not because he was the strongest or the cleverest, but because he had demonstrated the virtues necessary to rule wisely. The princess, restored to her human form, revealed the truths of her enchantment and shared the wonders of her palace with the kingdom. Her magic, once hidden, now became a source of prosperity and guidance. The alliance between the prince and the princess was celebrated not with fanfare alone, but with a deep acknowledgement of the journey they had undertaken, the wisdom they had gained, and the challenges they had overcome. The kingdom flourished under the rule of the youngest son, with the princess at his side. Together they maintained the lessons learned from the magical palace, to act with care, to observe and understand, and to value the hidden virtues in themselves and others. They established a court that rewarded patience and insight, and the people of the kingdom learned that courage was not only the act of facing danger, but also the strength to do what is right, even when unseen or unrecognized. The White Cat's palace became a symbol of wisdom available to those who approached life with respect and humility. In the quiet moments, the prince often reflected on the path that had brought him here. He remembered the forest, the enchanted streams, the glade of impossible fruits, and the trembling bridge. Each challenge had been designed not to intimidate but to teach, and each success had been a step toward understanding not only the world but his own heart. The princess, who had been the white cat, shared in this reflection, their connection strengthened by shared trials and the understanding that true power lay not in dominance, but in careful thought, compassion and partnership. The tale of the youngest prince and the white cat, once a secret whispered in the forests and hidden palaces, now became a story of triumph and enlightenment. It celebrated the hidden virtues, the rewards of patience and cleverness, and the deep truth that wisdom and kindness, when combined with courage and humility, could overcome even the most cunning enchantments. The prince's success was not only a personal victory, but a promise of harmony and justice for the entire kingdom. Though the challenges of life never truly ended, the prince faced the future with confidence, guided by the lessons he had learned and the enduring friendship and wisdom of the princess who had once been a cat. Their kingdom, their palace, and their hearts were forever changed, a place where virtues were honoured, where cleverness and compassion went hand in hand, and where the promise of adventure and understanding could continue to grow without end. The story closed not with an abrupt finish, but with a sense of quiet fulfillment, leaving room for imagination and the thought that true magic often comes from the simplest acts of patience, thoughtfulness, and trust.